Good morning to everyone. My name is Alice Korovesi, and on behalf of the UGCC Clean Energy Technology Network, I would like to welcome you to this webinar, which is actually the Research Outcomes Seminar, Hydrogen, the Energy Carrier of the Future, which is organized, this event is organized by the European Union delegation to the state of Kuwait and the state of Qatar, the UGCC Clean Energy Technology Network, and the Qatar National Research Fund. Some practical information before giving the floor to our experts. This event, this webinar is recorded. The video and the presentations that are going to be shared during today's seminar will be available at the network's website, and all participants will be notified accordingly. You can place your questions during the seminar, the online seminar, the webinar, either at the chat box or at the Q&A box. If you have a specific question for a speaker, you can name the speaker and then place your questions. I would like now to give the floor to Dr. Omar Bukris, the Senior Manager for Energy and Environmental Research Portfolio at QNRF, who is going to be the Master of Ceremony. So let's have a nice and fruitful webinar. Dr. Omar, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Ms. Korovesi. Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Your Excellency, Dr. Christian Tudor, Ambassador of the European Union to the State of Kuwait, State of Qatar, Dr. Abdel Sattar Al-Tai, Executive Director of the Qatar National Research Fund, Mr. Omran Al-Kuwari, Chief Executive Officer of the Qatar Foundation International, Mr. Frank Waters, Dr. Mustafa Taoumi, Dr. Ewana Makaroni, and Ms. Alice Korovesi, colleagues from the EU GCC Clean Energy Technology Network, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you come from in different time zones, and I hope all is well with you. It's a great pleasure for me to be your host and Master of Ceremony in this Research Outcomes Seminar entitled Hydrogen, the Energy Carrier of the Future. This Research Outcomes Seminar is a platform to provide valuable insights and discussions into research work, results, and solutions that QNRF, EU research and funding institutions, as well as other partners have been undergoing across various disciplines. We believe that it's important to showcase the work underway locally, regionally, and internationally to relevant beneficiaries and stakeholders from government and industry, as well as to the general public, since research outcome will have a direct impact on them. This seminar, as mentioned by Ms. Korovesi, is jointly organized and presented by the delegation of the European Union to the State of Kuwait, State of Qatar, the EU GCC Clean Energy Technology Network, and the Qatar National Research Fund. Ladies and gentlemen, certain topics lend themselves to be naturally of significant complexity and are resistant to conventional approaches. These topics are multi and transdisciplinary. They cover global scope, yet they are often very strategic and manifest important challenges to be tackled. Global changes, energy security, energy transition, climate change, environmental sustainability are but a few examples of such topics. It would be a major oversight to tackle such topics from single side or based on single experience or context. Multi-institutional, multi-sectoral, and international collaboration is actually key in addressing these needs. International transdisciplinary research provides knowledge for understanding, mitigating, and adapting to global environmental changes. So from this angle stems the importance of exchanging with our colleagues at the EU on various energy transition, clean energy topics, contributing this way to global sustainability changes, as well as to the national energy and climate targets, which are a priority in Qatar as featured in its research strategy. Hydrogen is certainly a topic that is in everybody's mind and everybody's agenda. Interest in the role of hydrogen as a clean fuel has been growing, and with the lowering cost of solar and wind power, hydrogen is becoming a big game changer in the race for green energy. The emergence of hydrogen as potential high-value proposition path to carbon-free economy has been observed in a number of projects around the world. Here are very few examples quickly to manifest this interest. So Australia, in partnership with Japan, invested $50 million in the first world hydrogen supply chain pilot project. The northern Netherlands region already won a 20 million euro EU grant in 2019 to become Europe's flagship green hydrogen project. Canada recently launched a hydrogen strategy with a federal investment of over $1 billion. And in Germany, hydrogen-powered trains are already operating. As from the energy side, several large companies are considering plans to lay pure hydrogen pipelines on seabed, similar to LNG transportation. So those were a few examples to testify that governments around the world are realizing that hydrogen will play an indispensable role in the effort to reach to the goals of the Paris Agreement. Hydrogen indeed is a versatile and climate neutral energy carrier that can be used to drive down greenhouse gas emission in sectors that are otherwise difficult to decarbonize. Ladies and gentlemen, this seminar will feature a high-level participation of His Excellency Dr. Christian Tudor, Ambassador of the European Union to the State of Kuwait and State of Qatar, Dr. Abdel Sattar Atai, Executive Director of the Qatar National Research Fund. Their presence and participation with us today is a very testimony of the much-needed synergy between institutions within the GCC and the EU, and the importance held at high level to major topics such as energy security and sustainability. The seminar is also benefiting from the participation of renowned speakers coming from prominent institutions from different sectors, and is categorized under 3 sessions, where the first technical session is entitled Strategies and Roadmaps for Green and Blue Hydrogen Production and Use, during which we will hear from Mr. Omran Al-Kuwari, Chief Executive Officer of the Qatar Foundation International, and will be followed by Mr. Yorgo Markakis. Sorry for the name. So it's Secretary General of Hydrogen Europe. The second technical session will be dedicated to research and development, and here we're happy having the participation of 4 scientists having been working on hydrogen energy projects funded by QNRF, namely Dr. Dhruv Arora from Shell Research and Technology Center in Qatar. He will be followed by Professor Ahmed Abdel Wahab, then Dr. Konstantinos Kakosimos from the Texas A&M University at Qatar. And the session will be concluded with Dr. Raoul Boussail from Qatar University. Now, the last technical session will be dedicated to markets and logistics of hydrogen and its derivatives. And here we will hear from Dr. Marcelo Contestativo, Principal Economist from the Qatar Energy and Environment Research Institute. Then Dr. Cornelius Mathis, CEO of DII Desert Energy, MENA Hydrogen Alliance. And finally, Mr. Martin Koopman, Manager of the Energy Transition at the Port of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. Ladies and gentlemen, your presence here today shows us that you realize that research and innovation are at the helm of national development. At QNRF, alongside our partner, we are committed to streamlining the R&D result, since we believe that synergy is a key factor in overcoming challenges. So again, I would like to thank you for attending this ROS edition, and I'm looking forward to a fruitful discussion. So without further ado, I would like to introduce His Excellency, Dr. Christian Tudor, Ambassador of the European Union to the State of Kuwait and the State of Qatar. He is the first EU ambassador based in Kuwait, a career of diplomat with 18 years of experience on the Middle East and the Gulf states. He previously served as the Romanian ambassador to the State of Qatar and held a number of positions at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Romania and NATO. Ambassador Tudor has a PhD and master's degree in security studies, a master's degree in international and European law, and a postgraduate degree in international relations. A fluent Arabic speaker, His Excellency is a frequent commentator on EU relations with the region and authors of a number of articles on the Middle East, politics or Middle Eastern politics. He is also the first Romanian diplomat to be awarded a NATO non-Article 5 medal by the NATO Secretary General for the service provided in Iraq as part of the NATO training mission in 2004. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the kind introduction. Thank you, Dr. Omar, again for the introduction. Dear Dr. Abdul Sattar Atai, the Executive Director of Qatar National Research Fund, dear distinguished experts and participants to this event, on behalf of the European Union delegation in Kuwait and in Qatar, I'm glad to witness and support today a concrete initiative strengthening EU-Qatar partnership in the field of hydrogen. I would like to thank the Qatar National Research Fund for their cooperation in organizing such an important webinar. Bilateral relations between the EU and the state of Qatar have been gaining momentum over the last years. In 2018, during the visit of His Highness the Emir to Brussels, the European Union External Action Service and the Qatari Foreign Ministry signed a cooperation arrangement aimed at strengthening both political dialogue and sectoral cooperation. The same year, both sides launched the EU-Qatar Informal Human Rights Dialogue. In 2019, Qatar became the first Gulf country to finish negotiations of an aviation agreement with the European Union. Throughout 2020, the EU and Qatar have joined forces to fight the negative effects of COVID-19. Qatari assistance in the repatriation of EU citizens back to Europe during the first wave of the pandemic will not be forgotten. To support cooperation with Qatar and the GCC on clean energy, the EU mobilizes flexible mechanisms. The EU GCC Clean Energy Technology Network is one of the most notable among them. This network was created in 2010. It is funded by the EU and has already carried out important activities in Qatar in cooperation with the Qatari authorities and research institutes. We strongly support concrete exchange and cooperation initiatives with Qatari stakeholders in the field of renewables and clean energy. Cooperation, as well as sharing of know-how and expertise, are important for the EU as they aim at meeting mutual sustainability and energy transition goals. When it comes to hydrogen, we are not just looking at a new energy carrier, we're also looking at the beginning of a revolution in our energy system. Moreover, Europe is leading that revolution. With the European Green Deal, we have a clear direction with respect to our energy system and transforming our economy. The goal is to reach a 55% reduction in emissions by 2030 and a carbon neutral Europe by 2050. Meanwhile, we are finding our way out of the COVID-19 crisis. Given the highest ever EU budget to support recovery, we have a historic opportunity for green investments. Renewable hydrogen is a key part of that vision to become climate neutral by 2050. When it comes to the clean energy hydrogen race, Europe is leading the change. The EU is an industrial leader in electrolyzer development. This reflects current demand on hydrogen-based applications in sectors which are considered difficult to decarbonize. In addition to the EU energy system integration strategy, the EU hydrogen strategy, launched last summer, was our first policy setting communication. This vision came with a set of ambitious targets: 6 gigawatts of electrolyzers installed by 2024 and 2 multiplied by 40 gigawatts by 2030. We are now in the implementation phase. As part of it, we're currently working on our Fit for 55 package, which is our way to support the EU climate neutrality ambition with concrete legislative proposals. This package will also ensure alignment across all of our policies, from energy to climate and from industrial policy to research and innovation. Implementation also means delivering on these elements concerning the European hydrogen ecosystem. This means creating infrastructure to transport and store hydrogen, producing higher levels of renewable electricity, designing a certification scheme and guarantees of origin for renewable and low carbon hydrogen, defining market rules, and establishing support schemes to promote hydrogen in the difficult to decarbonize sectors. It is clear that the hydrogen strategy is an investment agenda. At the EU level, we are expecting investments in the range of 320 to 460 billion euro by 2030. At the same time, we need sustainable investments in our research, development, and innovation. We need collective efforts on this matter as we cannot work alone. Europe is likely to depend on large-scale imports in order to secure its future needs of hydrogen. Our strategy addresses the opportunities to collaborate within other regions and countries on developing a common understanding, market rules, joint ventures, and trade. There is indeed a great scope for global cooperation. The Gulf is one of the regions with favorable conditions to produce cost-effective hydrogen. With excellent solar and wind resources, plus abundant expertise in industrial gases, the Gulf is ideally positioned to capitalize on a rapidly expanding clean energy hydrogen export market worldwide, which is expected to reach a value of 300 billion by 2050. We have already seen noteworthy blue and green hydrogen projects and strategies developing in the region. The production and export of green and blue hydrogen can support Gulf countries' goals on clean energy and economic diversification, ensuring that they will maintain their strong presence in the energy market. At the same time, this will support their emissions reduction commitments in the context of the Paris Agreements. We already have long-term partnerships with the GCC and Qatar. At this stage, I see a great potential for sharing practices, policies, and developing a global rules-based market, including common standards, safety, and certification. GCC countries, including Qatar, have already engaged in a number of research and development projects, including feasibility studies and pilot projects for blue and green hydrogen for different uses. We believe that there is a need to allocate more investments to strengthen the technical expertise, drive cost reductions in electrolysis, create an infrastructure network, and improve export business models. Overall, we want to ensure the existence of a coherent approach on the part of our partners who are willing to enter the hydrogen race in the context of the energy transition. Thank you very much, and I wish you an excellent conference today.
Excellent. Let me share again my screen. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I hope this is working. Yeah, there you go. So I would like to extend my sincere gratitude for your opening address and insights. Your Excellency, we are truly honored your presence, as today marks the continued collaboration and partnership between our institutions. Above all, I would like to thank you for your inspirational words, which I think are both educational and motivational. Indeed, the European Union has been pioneering when it comes to transition to green energy, and it's a model to follow. And we look forward to initiating new joint program with you and with the EU and consolidating previous ones. Your Excellency, the effort you have made and still make to maintain and strengthen collaboration, notably in research and development, have been admirable and appreciated. Thank you so much again for your continuing support. Moving now to the opening remarks of Dr. Abdel Sattar Al-Ta'i. So he is the Executive Director of Qatar National Research Fund. He earned his BSc, MSc, PhD, DIC, and ACGI in Chemical Engineering from the Imperial College London. Prior to his formative work at QNRF, Dr. Al-Ta'i held key positions in Iraq with the Ministry of Oil, Iraqi Atomic Commission, Ministry of Industry and Minerals, and the National Committee for Technology Transfer. During his tenure in Iraq, he supervised the execution of numerous strategic projects. Moreover, he played a key role in a number of strategic science and technology initiatives. Dr. Atai also taught at a number of Iraqi universities and supervised a number of master's and PhD students. He received numerous awards throughout his career, including the prestigious Science Medal of the Republic of Iraq. Since his arrival to Qatar in 2006 as a founding director, he led and still leading the development of QNRF as a world-renowned organization enabling Qatar to achieve R&D addressing its national vision 2030 of becoming a knowledge-based economy. Dr. Atai, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Your Excellency, Dr. Christian, Ambassador of the European Union.
I'm sorry, Dr. Aldaye, you need to be closer to the microphone. We are losing your voice. Apologies for the interruption.
Sorry. Okay. It is the connectivity. I have issue with connectivity. Now you hear me?
It's much better. Yeah, let's.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I go back again to Your Excellency, Dr. Christian Tudor, Ambassador of the European Union to the State of Qatar, Mr. Umran Al-Kuwari, the CEO of Qatar Foundation International, distinguished guests and speakers, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, and a very good morning or afternoon to you wherever you are. On the outset, I would like to express my sincere thanks to our partners, the EU GCC Clean Energy Technology Network, for organizing today's event jointly with the QNRF, focusing on the hydrogen energy and economy. For those of you who may not be aware, QNRF was established by Qatar Foundation in 2006 to support and promote research to help Qatar develop a sustainable, diversified economy. To that end, we are committed to the advancement of knowledge and education by providing funding opportunities for original, competitively selected research to distinguish Qatar within the region and across the world as a progressive nation that embraces scholarly excellence, innovation, creativity, inclusiveness, and merit. At QNRF, we firmly believe in empowering researchers to tackle the national grand challenges faced by Qatar in different domains, including energy security, water security, cyber security, and food security, among other national challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, your presence in this seminar underpins the importance of the topic at hand, as hydrogen has, over the last couple of decades, been gaining huge momentum and interest worldwide. This comes as a testimony to the unwavering effort done over the last 3 decades by the global scientific community and policymakers in tackling the challenges posed by the global warming to mankind. Starting from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, which was opened for signatures during the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, calling on certain states to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. This was followed by the adoption of Kyoto Protocol 5 years later in 1997, which called on the industrialized countries in particular to limit and reduce their greenhouse gases emissions in accordance with the agreed set of targets. Since then, the ever-increasing evidence-based scientific research, as well as the rising public awareness, have all culminated in the spectacular achievement in 2016, when more than 195 countries signed the Paris Agreement, where each signatory country proclaimed its own national determined contributions, or the NDCs, to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees above the pre-industrial level. Meanwhile, and commensurate with the above development, renowned Now, renewed energy sources, especially wind and photovoltaic, have undergone dramatic progress and growth, especially over the last decades. Dear colleagues, these technological achievements have led to unprecedented reduction in the unit cost of energy generated from renewable sources. Due to all these advances, it is quite pleasing to see that quite a number of OECD governments, especially the European Union and the UK, Japan, among others, have started taking genuine and concerted efforts in developing their own national strategies for achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050. In addition to that, it is also very pleasing to see that more than 13 countries have already put in place solid plans for adopting hydrogen in their energy transition strategies over the upcoming decades. On the economic front, in terms of opportunities offered by decarbonizing the energy sector and the related industries globally using hydrogen, it is estimated that this will require investment of approximately 15 trillion between now and 2050. Huge opportunity. That being said, decarbonizing an entire energy system represents a paradigm shift as it requires the introduction of disruptive changes in the energy production for electricity, industry, transport, buildings, and agriculture, which require finding innovative solutions, technologies, and policies in little more than a single generation. The process of devising effective and innovative solutions start with the baseline discussion, understanding the challenges and opportunities within the local context, agreeing on common goals and plans, and involving relevant beneficiaries and stakeholders from academia, research institutions, government, industries, and since the outcome will directly impact all of us. Coming back to QNRF efforts. In funding research projects related to energy sector, I am proud to announce that we have already funded more than 150 projects with a total budget of $120 million, which represent 10% of our total funding. Through our different funding programs awarded to local researchers from academia, public and industrial stakeholders, as well as our collaborators coming from over 50 countries. These projects cover the full spectrum of upstream processes in terms of energy production to downstream processes, including GTL and LNG processes and transportation. Most importantly, we focus our attention on the energy footprint, which is a consequence of climate change and environmental impact, taking into consideration Qatar's commitment towards its international agreement, including the Paris Agreement. We realize that the path to addressing the development of energy mix, in which hydrogen is an important component, is laden with many challenges to overcome. However, since this is a global challenge, there is a pressing need for all of us to join hands and exchange knowledge and expertise, as will be demonstrated in this, seminar. From Qatar perspective, I am pleased to see that the new Qatar RDI strategy 2030, which was published recently, has underpinned the need on moving towards green energy. While the long-term objective is to move eventually to green hydrogen production, it seems likely that in the initial stages of any transition to hydrogen economy, we need to rely on the blue hydrogen in large part from fossil fuels, using existing energy system with enhanced CCS, carbon capture and storage. Hence, natural gas production countries, including Qatar, which is blessed by being ranked the third in terms of the world total natural gas reserves, is set to play a big role in providing a bridge between the existing green blue hydrogen economy and the green future hydrogen economy. In addition to that, the accumulated expertise in the gigantic cryogenic liquefaction plants and the world's largest carrier fleet in transporting the LNG can offer great opportunities to the international community in the efforts to transition to hydrogen economy. Finally, and on a positive note, I am pleased to share with you that QNR is considering to launch a special funding call next year, inshallah, dedicated to the prospects and opportunities for hydrogen energy in Qatar, based on the outcome and the findings of this seminar. In closing, I would like to thank you all once again for attending this seminar, and I am looking forward to the ensuing fruitful discussions and the interaction to pave the way for making hydrogen the true energy carrier of the future. Thank you all, and God bless. Fiona.
Thank you so much, Dr. Atai. I would like to extend my sincere thanks for your opening remarks and insights, although sometimes we could not hear the voice goes and comes, but I think everybody could link to the content. And mostly thank you for being with us today. We are truly honored indeed. Your effort and that of QNRF during the past 15 years since inception have been nothing short of outstanding, Dr. Atai. QNRF is now a major driver of R&D locally and regionally. Notably, the figures you reported about the level of funding commitment is a very testimony of the clear attention the QNRF has and still gives to the domain of energy security and sustainability, and for your continued support. Now, moving to our next speaker, I'm going to hand over to Mr. Frank for setting the scene, after whom we go to the technical session, the first technical session that will be moderated by Dr. Mustafa. Mr. Frank, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Omar. I hope you can see my screen. I would like to take a couple of minutes for you to see a number of key elements in the concerning the role of hydrogen in the energy transition. Now, if we look at the technology to make hydrogen, it's basically water splitting using electricity. If the electricity is green, then we call the hydrogen from that process green. Of course, you can also make it from fossil fuels, but this is a picture of almost 100 years old. So this is not something that we need to reinvent. It has already also been done at scale, as you can see from these pictures. We just need to make it better, more commercial, etc. Now, first, let's look at Europe, because I think it's fair to say that Europe is the hottest market for hydrogen at the moment. And it's good to take a step back and look at the European energy system, because to your left, you see the share of final energy that's covered by electricity. I mean, these are the numbers for Germany. Roughly, Europe is 5 times those numbers, but I have the numbers for Germany. You know, roughly 20% of all final energy is electricity. And we've made tremendous progress in greening that up. So half of electricity in Germany last year was already green, and several countries in Europe are even beyond that. So overall, on average, half of European electricity is green. But then if we look at the bulk of final energy, those are molecules, and that is coal for power generation, it's natural gas for heating and industry. It is, you know, of course, diesel and petrol for transport. And there we still have a lot of work to do, because we only have 9% renewable molecules in the system. So yes, there is a lot of progress in the electricity field, and we see a lot of you know, the impact of solar and wind, but the bulk of it is still molecules, and they're still not clean enough. So what do we need to do? Of course, we need to keep building new renewable electricity if we want to go to a decarbonized energy system. But we also need to increase that share of electricity in the overall mix, because 20%, you know, on the left side, the electricity side is actually easy, because right now, solar and wind is cheaper than fossil fuel. So expanding that doesn't cost money, it actually saves money. So we then also have to expand the use of electricity in the mix. So electrification is a big element of the energy transition. But there is a point, and roughly, I would say at 50%, so if we increase the share of electricity 2.5 times, so we have electric vehicles, we have industrial processes, heat of buildings using heat pumps, etc. we do get into difficulties expanding that further. We need massive investments in infrastructure, overhead power lines, all of those things. And then we have to find a solution for the molecules. So we need to clean those up. We need to have more clean molecules, but also more electricity. Now, fast forward 2050, let's assume we have 50% green electricity because that's cost effective and easy to do. But beyond 50%, let's focus on molecules. They also have to be 100% clean because we have to get to a net zero carbon energy system. Europe is dedicated towards that. It's compliant with the Paris Agreement. But how to do that? What are the options? We can, of course, expand the use of biofuels. However, to the extent that we need the biomass, we do get into competition with food, land use, sustainability issues, water demand, and all of those things. So there is a limit to how much we can do with biomass. CCS, if we want to continue burning hydrocarbons, because we have them and they're cheap, we have to capture the CO2 and store that. So adding CCS to point emissions of CO2 is an option, but again, it's limited because we don't have the geology everywhere to the extent that we need it to cover half of Europe's energy need. And then we have hydrogen. And with hydrogen, we can also make ammonia, as already been mentioned. We can make methanol, we can make other fuels, e-fuels, jet fuels, etc. And out of these three options, I do think that hydrogen, especially green hydrogen, has the better cards because you can do it small, you can do it big, you can do it decentralized, centralized. You can shift these fuels very cost effectively over big distances. You can actually store them loss-free over seasons. So of the options on the molecule side, I think hydrogen definitely will have the biggest share. Now, what does that mean for the market? This is already an old picture done by the Hydrogen Council. It sort of laid out a vision that by 2050, we can have 18% of all final energy covered with hydrogen. As you look at my last picture, I think it's probably going to be more than 18%, but for the sake of argument, let's look at 18%. We then need to massively make investments in the infrastructure to make the molecules, to distribute them, convert them, etc. And it is going to be already at 18%, a $2.5 trillion industry, which is bigger than oil and gas combined right now. This is the current picture of how we basically produce oil and then distribute it to global markets. You see the big orange circle on the Arabian Peninsula. That is a large production center. Europe, for example, is dark blue. That means it's a net importer. So the traditional flow of hydrocarbons was from the Middle East to Europe, but also to the Asia Pacific, most notably Korea and Japan. America is becoming, sort of like a net importer exporter. They produce as much as they consume, and Russia, of course, sells natural gas to Europe. But all of that is going to change if we make the shift to clean fuels, because we will have different places where we can make cost effectively these new fuels. Because basically hydrogen, wherever you have wind and solar, which is almost everywhere, you can make hydrogen. Obviously, there's different price points. It will have a different type of competition. But look at Australia, look at Chile. Cheap land, high, very good renewable resource. Those are going to be the places where you'll be very cost competitive in making these new fuels. The importers are going to be roughly the same because Europe, Korea and Japan, they will remain net energy importers, as His Excellency Tudor from the delegation has already said. Europe will remain a net energy importer. So Europe is looking to creating partnerships for that to happen in the future. And this is a quick overview of some of the projects, 228. This is already an old picture, February 2021. But you see the big concentration in the middle. Europe has more than half of all the hydrogen projects that will likely materialize, and that number is growing. And then if I look at, of course, our region, Middle East, there is a number of very, very interesting projects. We see and follow with big interest the NEOM project, which is a 2.2 gigawatt electrolyzer. Mind you, the largest electrolyzer currently deployed is 10 megawatts. So 2.2 gigawatts is a huge step up. It's more than 200 times bigger than the biggest electrolyzer we have, currently. This is some place to watch. Of course, not all of these projects will materialize, but there is no doubt in my mind that this is going to be a very, very big opportunity, as we've already heard in the previous two speeches. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Frank. By the way, just a reminder to everybody, should you have any question, please write it down in the question, Q&A, or chat box. As a matter of fact, a question here to you, Frank, coming from Dr. Jace Birch. Given the regulations, including the environmental ones, what are the upper limits for green electricity in Europe and specifically in Germany?
Yeah, I don't think there are any upper limits. I mean, they're not, not from a regulatory point of view, because I mean, the regulation actually says that, they want to fully decarbonize, so get to a net zero carbon energy system, which by definition means that you have to go to 100%. And if you then look at electricity, because, we have to take into account that if we want to cover some of that with green hydrogen, that first requires green electricity. So you need more solar panels and wind turbines then just for the electricity. You need at least double that, and plus a little bit extra because of conversion losses for the green hydrogen. But there's no real upper limits. We can do 100%. Although it's as I said before, Europe is going to remain a net energy importer because there's just not enough space, and it's going to be cheaper to produce green hydrogen or green ammonia in places like Morocco or the Middle East. And then you export that from there into Europe, and this is going to be 100%. So there's no real upper limit.
Very quickly, a second question prior really to moving to the session one. So how do you see the competition, so to speak, between green and blue hydrogen moving forward?
Yeah, that is, I think in the short term, it is probably a matter of price. I mean, blue is slightly cheaper than green. But the issue is that green hydrogen, it's all based on technology. The sun shines for free, but of course you need equipment to convert it into something useful, and that is a piece of equipment. It's an electrolyzer. Now, like solar panels, like smartphones, like TVs, the more you make them, the cheaper they get. So, and this is a dynamic that we've seen in renewables. We've seen it with solar panels. The more you make them, the cheaper they get. And this will be exactly the same for hydrogen, for green hydrogen. So we will know that we're getting on a cost curve where over time we will become more competitive. I am not too sure that same dynamic is the case for blue hydrogen, where you're tapping into a finite resource and you need to store the CO2, etc. And that will over time just become a little bit more expensive. So I think there will be a crossover point where one actually will outcompete the other. So over time, I think many scenarios say the same, it will be green that will have the upper hand over time.
Yeah, excellent, very insightful and informative indeed. Thank you so much, Frank. And to keep up with time, allow me to move to the technical session number one, and we will always answer the extra questions on the Q&A session. So I'm handing over to Dr. Mustafa to moderate technical session number one. Dr. Mustafa.
Thank you very much, Dr. Omar, for your kind introduction. Well, it was a great pleasure working with you during the preparation of this very promising webinar on hydrogen. So as Dr. Omar mentioned, the session one dedicated to strategies and roadmaps for green and blue hydrogen production and use. This is, I think, a very important topic, as strategies, policies are key driver for hydrogen and all the clean energy technologies. For this session, we have two distinguished speakers, so I am delighted to have them on board in this session. Mr. Omran Al-Kuwari, who's the CEO of Qatar Foundation International, Qatar Foundation, and Mr. Jorge Katsimakakis, Secretary General of Hydrogen Europe. I think it will be a very promising session, and we will close after the presentation with a Q&A session moderated by me, but I will pick up some questions from the chat boxes. So without delay, I will invite Mr. Omar Al-Kuwari, who is, I think you have there short bios in our website. But let me just introduce briefly Mr. Omran, who is the CEO of Qatar Foundation International and a doctoral researcher at USL Institute of Sustainable Resources. Prior to joining QFI, Omran held several key leadership positions in the energy industry between 1999 and 2015 with Qatar Petroleum, ExxonMobil, Green Gulf, and South Hook Gas in the UK, Japan, and Middle East. So without delay, I will invite Mr. Omran to present his insight. So Mr. Omran, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for organizers, and thank you, Your Excellency, Dr. Tudor and Abdel Sattar, for the great introduction. As we discussed earlier, and I think we had some very good discussions so far to set the groundwork, especially the recent one by Frank Wouters. As we can see, hydrogen is a hot topic. It's one of those rare topics that's not only hot in energy research, as well as technology investment, but also policy development. And I think it's a tribute to its flexibility and its ability to address many different sectors at the same time. It's not the first time hydrogen, however, has been hot or in the news. There was a period in the 70s where there was oil price shock, but then and an interest in air pollution, but then hydrogen interest went back down as oil prices again dipped. And then 90s, similar, increased environmental awareness, raised the potential benefits to hydrogen, but again, too low oil prices discouraged projects. But recently in 2000s and then in the last couple of years, with climate change and with focus on decarbonization and improvements in technology, it's a different situation. And I think, as we can see from the speakers and from all the recent projects announcements, that hydrogen is probably here to stay. It's, as the IRENA calls it, most likely the missing link in the energy transition. So taking that into consideration, my topic is a bit more focused. Obviously, hydrogen is such a wide topic. We can, and in this discussion today, we'll address many different parts. But my specific focus will be looking at it from LNG, and what impact will the hydrogen development have on LNG, liquefied natural gas in general. And then try to understand where those two intersect and if there's any insights to consider. So let me just share my presentation. And that should be on the screen now.
Yes, we can see it. If you go full mode, yeah.
Yeah, is that fine?
Yeah, now it's fine, thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. So the LNG role in the hydrogen economy. So hydrogen, as I mentioned, is gaining prominence as a key tool to combat climate change. Why are we talking about LNG? Because within fossil fuel, it is the fastest growing fossil fuel. And even in net zero, or I would say Paris compliant scenarios, LNG is still forecasted to grow in at least 10 to 15, 20 years, even conservatively. And despite COVID and despite there are still quite a few projects being announced as this continues. Currently, the main option to hydrogen production to meet hydrogen demand is via natural gas, but as we heard from previous speaker, that's changing. Going forward, the main options to meet low carbon demand will be through natural gas combined with CCS or renewable energy sourced green hydrogen using electrolysis, as we just heard. In a decarbonizing world, however, long-term LNG could feature in the gas-fired power generation using CCS or as potential future hydrogen supply. And we'll talk about that a bit more. As hydrogen pathways develop, LNG could maybe possibly become a more cost-effective and CO2 effective way to meet hydrogen demand, subject to many different considerations, but it's something to consider. Natural gas-based hydrogen will have to compete, obviously, with green hydrogen long-term, and we'll dissect what that means. So this is just a summary of looking at hydrogen demand. This looks at the most recent different scenarios. This is low-carbon hydrogen, so this combines blue and green. As you can see, in all of these major scenarios, there is a significant increase in hydrogen demand, some more steep than others. At the same time, we see a projected global gas demand to decrease. This is obviously to be looked at in context. When comparing to coal or oil, the decrease is not as drastic, but there is a decrease nonetheless. And there is between those two graphs some overlap because, for example, in the IEA SDS scenario, approximately half of the low carbon hydrogen demand will be met through natural gas. So natural gas is a competitor in the short term, but also a beneficiary of low carbon hydrogen demand. So there's so many different considerations, as the previous speaker mentioned, but this is just to give a high level view of where the trends are going. So just to give a summary of where LNG can play a role, there's roughly 3 different ways natural gas can play a role, One is to deliver LNG as is, and then at the receiving terminal, capture carbon, apply carbon capture, and then inject hydrogen into the grid. The other option is in the upstream side, convert the upstream gas from hydrogen to ammonia, which allows it to be shipped in an easier way, then reconvert ammonia back to hydrogen, or use ammonia directly in, for example, coal-fired power stations and so on, as we've seen in Japan recently. And the third option is to completely convert the upstream gas into liquid hydrogen and ship that liquid hydrogen, which requires some economic and technical advancements. But roughly, there are 3 ways where gas can play a role. There is, of course, pyrolysis, which is another technology, but roughly it's how do you deliver that gas, and then applying, instead of methane reforming, you would use pyrolysis, for example. So why were we looking at those two besides the overall demand and the importance? Well, there's actually also some links between those two that should be investigated a bit more. From obviously a feedstock natural gas, I mean, as the fastest growing segment within natural gas, LNG will play a role. I mean, if there is a place for quote unquote blue hydrogen, LNG obviously will play the key role there to deliver that. There are less and less pipeline gas projects, and there's less indigenous supply, especially in Europe, for example. Therefore, if there is a role for blue hydrogen, LNG will meet that. The LNG industry is forecasted to have a positive future in the next 10-15 years, as we mentioned. So how does that fit in with hydrogen? But also in terms of flexibility, it's a lot of operational flexibility in LNG that can, in some ways, meet some of those kind of short-term to medium-term challenges, such as floating regasification, being able to bring LNG or gas quickly to markets in different places, to even extract markets in places where it was not extracted potentially commercially viable before. So that gives you opportunities there. From a technical operational synergies also, there are a few areas that are starting to be looked at. I mean, liquefaction, if we were talking about liquefying hydrogen, liquefying LNG, they're very different in terms of the temperature needed, but there are some synergies potentially in some of the technology in the upstream there that can be looked at. There are ways where some of those characteristics, those kind of technologies behind cryogenic liquids and so on can be applied, and there are some studies behind that. But also in terms of downstream, utilizing natural gas and introducing low carbon hydrogen to those grids is a possibility, and in some places it's already being done. It could be up to 10-20% of the current gas grid can take in low carbon hydrogen, which allows for synergies there. In terms of commercial synergies, probably even more. In terms of the shipping side, although there were some initial views on reconverting LNG ships to hydrogen ships, but it seems to be unlikely. But however, of course, using LNG as a feedstock will help the LNG industry, shipping industry a bit more. But from a value chain component, the way LNG was developed 30, 40 years ago and still being developed, there are lots of similarities for hydrogen potentially. You need long-term buyers. They're the same, as we heard before, the same importers previously could probably be the same importers for LNG will be the same importers for hydrogen. You need a very complex chain with project financing from the upstream all the way to the downstream, assuming there is a level of exports and imports being developed. You will need some potential government-to-government agreements, which we've already seen, some bilateral agreements, some infrastructure development and transport. All that has been something where the hydrogen industry can learn from the LNG industry. And of course, long-term contracts, you know, these large projects will need to be underpinned initially as technology improves and as a shorter-term market develops. So there are a lot of potential vertically integrated kind of approaches that can be applied from one industry to another. And really a lot of the same players, whether it's energy companies or the technology providers, are companies that are looking to transfer some of that large project management experience or large kind of capital intensive technologies from one to the other. Now for LNG, hydrogen is also very important because if you look at the value chain of LNG, there's obviously a lot of efforts to decarbonize the value chain as much as possible to reduce the methane and the carbon kind of intensity or carbon emissions of the entire chain. The chain obviously starts from the production all the way to delivery. And we've seen efforts such as carbon neutral cargoes. We've seen efforts being pushed by the EU with the methane strategy. We've seen producers like QP announcing carbon capture to be installed in the upstream and liquefaction. We've also seen producers saying adding electrification as much as possible, using solar energy, for example, to run these plants as much as possible. And all of that will have a huge impact on the emissions. But at the end of the day, over 70 to 75%, depending on the carbon intensity of the source, of the emissions is downstream, meaning, for example, the power plant. And to do that, long-term importers and exporters will have to look at different measures, and hydrogen provides that opportunity. Blue hydrogen specifically, or natural gas-based hydrogen, provides that opportunity where you could actually decarbonize the entire chain if the conditions make sense. And if you look at all the decarbonization options that LNG producers have, these are all things that are being looked at, that are already announced or being implemented. And it obviously depends on project to project in terms of the geographical components or the resources available. But these are all things that are being done. However, if you look at more strategic or hydrogen related ones, these are the ones where the LNG exporters long term and the LNG importers will start to think about, okay, well, we can decarbonize and lower emissions as much as possible. If we want to truly decarbonize, we may want to look at these options, which is on the importing end, which is applying methane reforming or pyrolysis, then blending the hydrogen to the grid or straight into the grid or straight to industrial users and clusters, which we've seen as a potential first wave of opportunities. And that could be a great opportunity for LNG industry to kind of deliver high value, low carbon hydrogen first and then be part of that transition. And also more strategically long term, if you're a resource holder, but and also you have access to large scale renewables, you could think about producing hydrogen on the upstream. We mentioned blue here, but there's no reason why it can't also be green or both, depending on the characteristics. But this is where hydrogen really also factors in. That, as previous speaker mentioned, eventually, yes, blue hydrogen might be cheaper now. Eventually, it will be green only. What does that mean? Is there a role there? And what do you do in the meantime? So this is an example of some research that we've done. It's just illustrative here to show you that the hydrogen economy, hydrogen value chain will be very complex and will develop in many different ways. And there are different options, considerations, from production technology to production location to the type of transport. I mean, we talked about here liquid hydrogen, ammonia, different derivatives, or using LNG to then convert it. There's also strategic considerations about being an importer versus an export versus continuing to try to produce domestically. And there's also in terms of the role it plays in the economy. If you're looking to be a hydrogen economy, for example, like Japan, or you're looking to use hydrogen to decarbonize hard to abate sectors, all those choices, if you look at it from LNG exporter standpoint, have different impacts and different implications, short-term and long-term. And this is how we're trying to analyze. And to summarize this in a different way, this is a graphical representation of the LNG chain. And you look at it two different pathways, which is basically the blue hydrogen pathway. And if that is a pathway that makes sense in some regions, at least in the short to medium term, as you can see, there's high opportunity for LNG value chain to continue to operate or to have minor, some modifications, but to be a major player. The challenge will be in your gasification, where you'll need to have ability to manage your CO2 content, either at the receiving terminal or close to it. It needs to be economically viable. And then, but something that's interesting to note here now is, for example, gray hydrogen, which is the non-blue, which is high CO2 emitting hydrogen, is now almost very close to blue hydrogen. If you look at even today's CO2 prices in Europe, I think that gap is closing very quickly. But that gap can also close with green hydrogen even quicker as we go forward. And if that was to develop, as you can see, if it's green only, for example, your options for energy exporter are really minimal. You may be able to retrofit some of the facility, and your upstream gas obviously will have less value. So as you can see, the implications are significant. This is just illustrative, but this is significant for different pathways. This is something also we covered in the previous presentation. I'm not going to go into it in detail, but natural gas-based technologies such as natural gas reforming and process will have to compete against electrolysis. And we saw that this is a curve from the IAE. Previous speaker summarized this very well. The degree of course, will depend on many things. Technology will be a big thing, economies of scale in the production side, but also policy choices, CO2 prices, potentially also more of a dogmatic choices. You can say some regions will say, no, we want green only, no matter what. All those things will impact short to medium term. Natural gas-based technology, though, taking all considered and looking at the big picture, is most economical choice for short to medium term. And to most studies say 2030, 2035, depending on the region. Long term, it could become competitive if renewable energy-based electrolyzers costs come down. But also you could have to factor in the cost of natural gas, and that will depend on the region. Amongst all the technologies, natural gas-based and CCUS can be supplanted by methane pyrolysis, which is an interesting one because that is technology that is being looked at more and more, and basically that eliminates the need to manage the CO2. It gives you solid carbon, which is an easier product to manage. It's to store. This could be a game changer for the quote unquote blue hydrogen or natural gas-based hydrogen, but that's a lot of uncertainty there. It's also quite energy intensive to produce, to utilize pyrolysis, but there are quite a few investments going into it, and it's something to keep an eye on. Pyrolysis could have a big potential, as I mentioned, if it could be a game changer, but there's something for now, I think, to just think about more, as I mentioned. Low carbon hydrogen has potential to become a significant user of natural gas from now to 2040, depending on measures taken and depending on LNG players being proactive potentially. Depending on how low carbon hydrogen supply technology mix and associated market develops, there are different but significant implications in the industry, as we saw. If low carbon production is mostly met with natural gas based, this could actually help a lot from a natural gas producing standpoint in extending the bridge. It could also slow down the decline in natural gas consumption. It could be seen as a not just better than coal, but also part of a deep decarbonization pathway tool, which could be beneficial for the industry. If, of course, renewable-based technologies become more prominent, natural gas consumption will be affected, and energy industry will be affected. This is quite logical. And to finalize, I think the LNG industry is, however, well-positioned to take advantage of natural gas-based low-carbon hydrogen demand. There is know-how, there's expertise, and in many cases, the economics make sense. It's just a question of how fast technology moves and how policy develops. the hydrogen value chain, and whether hydrogen is an opportunity or threat LNG will develop over the next decade. It's both. It's an opportunity, it's a threat, and depends on so many factors, but there is definitely some synergies there. And just to close out, is a paper that I'm co-authoring and leading on taking some of these concepts, but also modeling different hydrogen scenarios and seeing how that impacts the LNG industry, and to see where the technical and the commercial impacts are on a techno-economic basis. So thank you very much. That's my presentation for now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Omran, for this insightful and concise presentation. Please stay with us for the discussion after Jorge's presentation. I think from the beginning we heard a very inspirational word from His Excellency, the Ambassador, Dr. Christian Tudor, and Dr. Abdul Sattar, Frank Wouters. I think hydrogen is coming as a career for the future, but there is still some competition, you know, with other resources, as Mr. Omran mentioned. But from the European side, we have to hear from Mr. Jorge also what happened in Europe, and what is the roadmap for Europe to achieve those ambitious targets. Mr. Jorge is the Secretary General of Hydrogen Europe, but before joining Hydrogen Europe, he was a representative of the Infineon technology in Brussels and a member of the European Parliament between 2004 and 2014, inter alia in the Committee Industry, Technology, Research and Energy, where he contributed to lay the cornerstone for the first and the second joint undertaking on hydrogen fuel cells. So Mr. Jorge, the floor is yours for 15 minutes. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Dr. Taoumi. Thanks for the invitation. It's an honor. Unfortunately, due to the delay, I will have problems to stay for the discussion. But Frank Wouters can, I think, take over and answer questions. He's very well acquainted with all these topics here. So shukran and thanks again. Hydrogen Europe is an association that encompasses 272 members this week. We are growing. This is the first page of all our members, and you can see it's alphabetical. It's members from all parts of the value chain of hydrogen technologies, from production of hydrogen to dissemination, not only via pipelines, and then to the use. And here you see the second page of the membership. Oil and gas companies are, of course, also represented, but the main membership consists of technology providers that have to build electrolyzers, build fuel cells, and use them. Now, what has changed during the last year? I think, and I am very happy that this paper that we presented last year, which is called A Green Hydrogen for a European Green Deal, a 2x40 gigawatt initiative, has had quite some influence, as it describes how we can use this disruptive change of the European Green Deal and the allocation of public funding to greening basically the energy system, but also the industry and mobility system. And here electrolyzers that turn renewable energy into hydrogen and oxygen can play a major role. This paper outlines that, and you can see there are partners that represent the Gulf region, but also DII, so Desert Tech 2, if you wish, that's rather the Northern African part, Ukraine, but also Africa as a whole are mentioned here as important partners, because I think I jump here, because as we see here, the production cost of hydrogen are very clearly linked to the production cost of renewable energy. And here you see that in certain regions of the world, the production costs are already below $1.6 per kilogram of hydrogen. And the whole MENA region and the Gulf region is very close to that. The most attractive region at the moment is the Atacama Desert in Chile. There you see a very red spot, but also parts in your environment there are absolutely attractive. So this paper then led to a historical day, 8th of July last year, and that was basically the starting point in Europe of an extreme interest into hydrogen technologies, into hydrogen as the other leg of the energy industry mobility transition. One leg being electricity, the other leg being hydrogen. So what happened that day? So first of all, the EU adopted the hydrogen strategy. The EU launched the so-called Clean Hydrogen Alliance, which has more than 1,500 members so far and is an umbrella for companies, but also for policymakers and the civil society to find the right way into projects. And I'll come to these projects later on. But also the next gas package was given another name, Energy System Integration Package. It was presented that day, and it's quite hydrogen focused. So future gas policy, and that's why it's good to follow up the LNG focus. Future gas policy is pretty much focused on hydrogen. Now, what are the targets of the strategy, of the European hydrogen strategy? So basically is, and you see that here on the left-hand side, to create, of course, technology leadership on a global scale. 500 companies in 2020. So I told you that the Clean Hydrogen Alliance already encompasses more than 1,500 in 21. So you see that the 2,000 companies in 2050, I think it's something we can achieve quite soon even. But the most important target when it comes to the capacity is the 6 gigawatt electrolyzer capacity producing clean hydrogen as of 24, and 2 times 40 gigawatt as of 2030. 40 gigawatt in Europe in itself, and another 40 in the neighborhood of Europe, where the Gulf and the MENA region, of course, would be part of it. Here on the right-hand side, you see how this translates into CO2 reduction targets, 9 million tons already in 24, and 90 million tons, a tenfold reduction of CO2 in 2030. The investment needs in the renewable energy field, and especially in electrolyzers, and here we concentrate on electrolyzers only, would be between 5 to 9 billion in 24, and well, up to 44 billion in 2030. This I showed you already, but what is clean hydrogen? Here, and that's one of the most important questions, here we need to see what the European Commission has defined as clean, and they have defined in a delegated act, which needs the approval by the member states still, but it has defined clean hydrogen production corresponding to not more than 3 tons of CO2, 2.2 to 3 tons of CO2 in a ton of hydrogen. So that is approximately 74% of decarbonization. And that's the threshold that splits clean from non-clean hydrogen. That's important because some of the technologies that we have heard, like SMR plus CCS, do not achieve that target. Some others like ATR, so with more temperature, they do achieve. And the renewable technologies, but also so electrolysis via renewables, but also via nuclear, and the pyrolysis achieve easily these targets. There is also a mentioning of ammonia. For ammonia manufacturing, it now requires to be compliant with hydrogen as input for it to be in the taxonomy range. And this was an interesting success also for Hydrogen Europe, because ammonia plays an important role in transporting hydrogen or in being used as a fuel in the maritime shipping. So I told you about the projects that we are currently engineering, And here you see a rough overview of the volumes of projects that we see and the volumes of hydrogen that we see to be realized in early mover projects. There are different names. I don't want to irritate you or bother you with names, but definitely there are some important countries like Italy, like also Spain, being hubs or being also transmission countries for hydrogen that would be imported from Northern Africa. And there will be other countries that will start to produce the electrolyzers because the capacity has to be built up. And definitely, if you see this White Dragon project in Greece, similar projects will be in Italy and Spain. These governments are now endowed with a lot of money from the recovery and resilience funds. So the after COVID-19 funds, I think globally well known, and the governments will invest into hydrogen manufacturing, to say the least. Well, these flagship, large scale flagships, they cover the whole hydrogen value chain, and they achieve already a quite interesting amount of hydrogen, of volume of hydrogen and decarbonization. And as you see, in all the parts of the whole value chain. How do we wish then to not make these projects just state aid funded projects, but future market compatible? Here I would like to introduce to you a mechanism that we would like to promote. It's on one hand, a funding program to efficiently promote the market ramp up of green hydrogen and hydrogen-based derivatives. It's also based on hydrogen energy partnerships with countries that have a correspondingly large potential for long-term, cost-effective and reliable supply of green hydrogen to the EU. So Qatar and Kuwait are definitely countries that would fall exactly into that category. And there should be long-term purchase contracts on the supply side, and on the demand side, contracts for difference. What does that mean? Please look at the left-hand side. You see there bubbles standing for different volumes of hydrogen production. So just imagine a steel company in France would need 10 megatons of hydrogen in the time of 25 to 30, 10 megatons. The mechanism that we would like to establish here, there's a working name, High Europe, could, via an auction, ask who on the globe could deliver the megatons of hydrogen for the lowest price. And the cheapest would get the bid. Then there would be a hydrogen purchase agreement over this time period, 25 to 30, which brings both partners together. And still, the hydrogen, that early stage, will be too expensive. That we can levelize via, on the right-hand side, a contract for difference. What does that mean? So any difference that the steel company might need to pay on top of the normal coal-based production path will be covered by state aid. Not forever, but especially for the time until the price of hydrogen, of renewably produced hydrogen or clean hydrogen in general, is down to the size, down to the level of a normal coke production. And you see the combination of auctioning and a contract for difference. So auctioning for the supply side and contract for difference for the demand side will make the deal. Let's have a look at a special case, which is trucks. So trucks could use, today they use combustion, so ICE, internal combustion engines. And what you see here shows what we need to do in order to boost fuel cell trucks and at the same time to oust from the markets the combustion engines. What you need is three things. You need some regulatory incentives, some public subsidies, but also private investments. And this hill that you see in 2030 So where basically the combustion engines become more expensive because of regulatory incentives. So take the Swiss example, where any kilometer of a truck using a Swiss street will be priced with 1 franc per kilometer if it's a combustion engine using diesel. That's a very simple regulatory incentive to buy, instead of combustion, to buy a fuel cell car. And that's what in combination would lead to lower prices. And you can see here that the regulatory push might already in 2030 lead to a pari effect, and in the end to clear changes. So what we did is we presented a Hydrogen Act, so a paper that you can download from our website, Hydrogen Europe's website, that wants to describe which elements are needed in order to establish these markets. One very important element will be a guarantee of origin system. So hydrogen guarantees of origin are an essential instrument to ramp up hydrogen. We believe it's a separate energy carrier with a different chemical and physical property to methane, of course. A separation from hydrocarbon gas, GOs, is critical here. And it must include the primary energy sources and the GHG, the greenhouse gas footprint. The GOs need to capture the attributes resulting from different production pathways. And we believe that very soon an international GO system for hydrogen import to Europe, but also for export, will be established. And we believe it should follow the 5 T's. It must be trackable, traceable, transparent, tradable, and trustworthy. My last slide shows that this certification scheme exists already in a very basic form. It's called Certif High. You might check it if you wish. So there is a certified system for green, renewably produced hydrogen, but also for low carbon hydrogen. I proposed to you the threshold already. Carbon content is the main currency in all these systems. And what we would need is an international governance for imports and exports of hydrogen, a globally functional system of assessing the carbon content of the molecules and the sustainability criteria. With that, I would like to thank you for the invitation. Thanks for your attention, and also excuse myself for not being able to attend the Q&A. But again, Frank Wouters, I think, will make it. Shukran. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Jorge, for this very clear, concise, and straightforward presentation. I think we heard a lot of good things, and that is, I think, one of the elements or the pillars of any hydrogen strategy is to have, this roadmap for a country or for a region as Europe, and this is very important for an emerging career as hydrogen. Thank you very much, Jorge, and hope we can count on you in our future events. Thank you very much. Frank, are you ready for the QA? As Jorge mentioned, you. Yes, thank you very much. So, Mr. Omran, yes. So I have a couple of questions because we are running out of the time, and it's very, very important also to keep some time for the others. Yes, for Mr. Omran, I think you highlighted, this kind of competition between LNG and hydrogen, but at the end, is there any competition, or they complement each other? So what do you think about this?
I think it depends on who you are and your timeline, right? So there are different products, and there are obviously have a different kind of characteristics. But I think for LNG, hydrogen presents a short to medium term opportunity, but long term it could be something where it could cannibalize itself potentially. So it's a very tricky one, and I think it's not a straightforward answer, but I think it's something where LNG industry needs to be very, very aware of. Whereas 10 years ago, the narrative was very clear that natural gas is the future and it was better than coal, which still stands. However, decarbonization is moving so fast, and the focus on climate change and Paris agreements have been taken more and more seriously, that that narrative is no longer enough. So therefore, hydrogen is becoming more and more of a serious kind of industry to take in consideration, and that's where LNG needs to understand what that means for them, and what it means if you're. It also has different meanings in terms of if you're a resource owner versus if you're someone who has an LNG terminal, or someone who has LNG ships. Each one has different timeline. Each one has different risks, and also the geography matters. I think LNG will probably have a different role in Asia as obviously in Europe and so on. So that's kind of the summary, kind of complex answer that just shows how the energy transition is moving differently in different places.
Thank you very much for this clarification. And what about the market? Because some regions, they are importing or exporting LNG, and hydrogen is coming. So how about Europe? Have you some insight to clarify this specific, market, Europe?
Yeah, I think Europe is going to be the epicenter of hydrogen. I think the whole world is watching how Europe, deals with hydrogen from a variety of aspects. And our previous speaker had a very kind of strong kind of view on that hydrogen must be green, more or less. Although ATR is also blue, but the green will be a prominent role, and that's the case for a lot of countries in Europe. But I think the European Union is putting together its views, and it's kind of taking a more pragmatic view that's focusing on decarbonization, it's focusing on targets. And I think it's moving a bit, my opinion. I think maybe a year ago, there was a view that eventually it's going to be green only, but I think now there is understanding that let's not bet on technology, let's bet on targets, and let's let the policy makers put policies that make sense and let the market adjust. So having said that, I think depending on infrastructure, depending on where the users, for example, Northwest Europe, for example, Northern Europe, where there's access to carbon capture, or even the UK, there could be more room to play for blue hydrogen than may have been expected a year or 2 years ago, just because the target's so aggressive. And therefore, it could be a place for LNG exports to support that. But in different parts of Europe, or as things evolve, that may change, depending though on also the ongoing investment and development of these projects. There's a lot of announcements, but as mentioned earlier, the largest one so far has only been 10 gigawatts in terms of green hydrogen. So until we see these big gigawatt projects appear and we see them operating, it's going to be hard to really bet on that. But I think what we can bet on is that there will be a need for hydrogen. It's just how it gets developed that will depend on things we mentioned.
Thank you very much for this clarification, Mr. Omran. Now I move to Frank. Frank, we heard from Jorge a lot of insight about this hydrogen strategy for Europe. But from my side, who is responsible of the implementation of this strategy? Is the government, the industry, or both, or another stakeholder was engaged in this pathway?
Yeah, that's a good question. In 2019, I was in Brussels at a hydrogen conference, and the executive vice president, Frans Timmermans, who is in charge of the Green Deal and the hydrogen strategy, already said this is not something that the private sector can do alone, and it's not something that the public sector wants to do alone. So it's very clearly, a public-private sector play. There is a lot of, if you're looking at Europe, you're talking about Grid energy, there's 200,000 kilometers of high pressure gas pipes that can be converted to accommodate hydrogen, either blended or pure. That is a regulated business, like much of the electricity sector. So it is not going to be a pure private sector thing. Now, what Jorgo mentioned was the Hydrogen Act for Europe, and part of the thinking behind that is that last year we've seen, the emergence of many hydrogen strategies, which are ambitious. They contain targets, etc. So they're rich in ambition, but very poor in policy detail. And the fact is, at the moment, we're not trading hydrogen. Most of the hydrogen is captive. You're making it where you need it, either for fertilizer in a refinery. But in the future, that is going to change. It will be a traded commodity like LNG, like natural gas, like diesel, etc. And for that to happen, you need to look at the regulatory framework that enables that. And that is a wide open space. We see in Europe, talks about hydrogen as a fuel. So there is a whole debate in the fuel section. There is a debate about hydrogen in the steel sector and in other industries, in the natural gas sector, the electricity sector. So the discussion about regulation for hydrogen is all over the place. And that was actually the reason why we sat and formulated this Hydrogen Act for Europe, to have one location where you look at hydrogen in the future going forward from an infrastructure point of view, as well as a market point of view. And we just hope that this paper, provides some inspiration for policymakers. But in the end, regulation is typically something that governments do, hopefully in consultation with the private sector. But in the end, it's a government task to enable the industry, to make investments. Money will not come from the governments. Yes, some extent, but the bulk of the investments will have to come from the private sector. But that will only happen if there's a conducive framework for that. So this is the interplay between the public and the private sector.
Thank you very much, Frank. Definitely, the PPP is a model or option is the best, I think, pathway or framework to engage for implementing any strategy. And it's, as you know, it succeeded for renewables. And I think there's a lot of experience on renewables, how the PPP worked. And I think now hydrogen is coming with this, kind of, multi-stakeholder framework, and each part has to do his own stuff, as you mentioned. As I questioned Mr. Omran about Europe, but Frank, how Europe is seeing also the GCC is a market to export hydrogen or to import. Can you clarify this?
Well, first of all, there's a number of things because, as I said before, hydrogen is a technology play because, you need technology to make it from.
There is some cut in your voice, Frank.
Pardon? Hello? Say that again?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So, it's a technology play, as the ambassador said.
I'm not hearing you, Frank.
In that respect. Europe is at the moment, exporting hydrogen technology, whether it's carbon capture or whether it's electrolysis or whether it's ammonia synthesis. If you look at the NEOM project, Electrolysis are German, the ammonia loop is from Denmark. So Europe is a supplier of technology. But overall, the flow of the molecules will come from this region to Europe. Europe will import, wherever it makes sense. And we saw a very interesting interaction between the Saudi energy minister recently at the IEA 5th EU Energy Day and Executive Vice President of the Commission, Frans Timmermans. And this is sort of like the narrative that is starting to materialize, is beyond hydrocarbons. How can we green up those molecules and make them part of a future energy relationship, building on the existing energy relationship.
Thank you very much, Frank. Very insightful. And with this, I would like to close this session. But before, I wanted to thanks Mr. Omar Al-Kuwari and Mr. Euro Kastimarkakis and also Frank Woter for their time and availability and for their excellent presentations and also clarification. Thank you very much, and back to you, Dr. Omar, for the rest of the webinar.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Dr. Mustafa and colleagues. It has been a very fruitful, informative, and insightful session. Thank you to everybody. So for the sake of time, moving forward to the next session, session number 2, which is the R&D. Just quickly to why do we need to talk about R&D in this session? Well, obviously the session that we just ended, the strategies and map, laid down, and I think everybody appreciates the complexity of the topic we are talking about and the interdependencies of so many components. And whether going this road or that road or implementing this or that strategy largely depends on one of the key components, which is the scientific complexity. Maybe some road may not be feasible in the first place within a given context because of scientific complexities. And hence, QNRF sits in trying to provide solution to those scientific complexities within a given context, mainly the context of the GCC and specifically the context of Qatar. And therefore, we thought of having this R&D session to show you real-time, hands-on cases with some of our scientists that have been funded by QNRF in specific complexities related to hydrogen energy and how to move finally to the green hydrogen. So we're going to start first with Dr. Dhruv Arora. He is leading the Qatar Shell Research and Technology Center and Qatar Foundation. He champions the center's vision of fueling innovation into Qatar's energy ecosystem by driving more gas monetization through technical and research excellence in the space of gas to X, LNG, GTL, chemicals, and other products. So he focuses with his team on CO2 utilization, gas conversion, catalyst products, processes, development, and everything towards realizing future assets. Dr. Arora will tell us today about his ongoing project. The project is still active, entitled Continuous and Scalable Hybrid Photoelectrochemical Production of Renewable Hydrogen from Non-Portable Water Sources. Just before handing over to you, Dhruv, I know we all agreed with the speakers about the maximum 15 minutes, but the more you squeeze your time, the better for everybody. Thank you. Would you unmute yourself, Dhruv?
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
And is my screen visible as well?
Yes.
Okay, super. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Omar, for the introduction as well, and distinguished guest participants. I'm really honored to be here and opening the technical session. But I would also like to emphasize on really the innovation for sustainability, specifically hydrogen and alternatives that I'm championing in Qatar. My highlight is going to be the project that I'm leading, which is as Dr. Omran mentioned, continuous and scalable hybrid photoelectrochemical production of renewable hydrogen for non-potable water sources, or in short, as we call it, the HIPEC hydrogen. This is a collaboration between Texas A&M Qatar, National Chemical Laboratories, and Shell, and it's QNRF funded. I think for this forum, with all the discussion that we've had in past an hour and a half, it's a moot point to say that hydrogen has really arrived. Yeah. If we look at the graph on the right, we have had so much discussion around this as well. The demand for hydrogen is just going to see a tremendous growth. And championed by the regulatory adoption, the technological advancements, which has been ongoing for quite some time now, and now the societal acceptance, the pressure from the societies as well, the hydrogen advancement is just going to continue, and hence it's not surprising that we hear news about hydrogen advancements from all over the globe pretty much every day. There are some initiatives or the other being prompted in every part of the world. What's important to realize as well is, as Frank pointed out, this is going to be a huge, huge effort. The scale of the problem is very large as well, all the way from hydrogen production, the transport, the utilization, everything needs to be encompassed into this new infrastructure that is coming up. And innovation will play a very key role. So what we see at Shell, of course, is that there is the consumers, the energy providers, the suppliers, and the governments. Everybody has to come together to essentially form this new hydrogen economy. And we've seen Dr. Omran mentioning this as well. I would just like to give an example of Pearl GTL. That's the largest gas to liquids plant here in Qatar that Shell is operating. In the Pearl GTL plant, which is the largest gas to liquids plant, it's founded on a very solid foundation of 40 years of research. But roll back time 40 years back, people were still sending emails to each other, requesting for meetings to be set up and discussions to be had. And with all due respect to the pioneers of those research, the latter stages of the research was moving a lot faster, enabled by technologies which are like the digitalization technologies that enable such kind of innovation to happen. Again, realizing that geographically, we are not limited to where innovation can happen. We talked about Europe as being the champion in terms of hydrogen production, but the hydrogen research and hydrogen innovation will happen all over the world. And as such, in Shell, we have the technological hubs, our research centers located in Bangalore, Amsterdam, and Houston. But we also have smaller centers like the one that I'm leading, which is the Qatar Shell Research and Technology Center here in Qatar, where we tap into the local innovation opportunities that are happening. And of course, Qatar, with its natural resources, both in terms of the natural gas and also the abundant availability of sun, it's a fantastic location for conducting the gas to X research. And that's the focus of the center, where we look at the natural gas, CO2, nitrogen, hydrogen as the gases, and we look at X as the molecules that we would like to produce from this, focusing both on the liquid molecules that we currently produce in gas to liquids, but also the future molecules that we would like to produce from this, including the hydrogen as through pyrolysis and so on. In recent years, the center's activity has really skyrocketed thanks to QNRF incentives, and that's a very unique opportunity that Dr. Abdul Sattar mentioned has been created here in Qatar, where a public-private partnership is possible. And why I say unique is very evident in my next slide, which is the project that I am leading, the HYPEC Hydrogen, where normally in a public-private partnership, the public enterprise is the one that is the recipient of the awards or the consortia. But in this case, Shell as is the direct recipient of the award and administers the grant that QNRF is allowing to administer. Shell, of course, brings its own funding as well into the project, and the project gets conducted into Texas A&M Qatar and National Chemical Laboratories. Yeah, so that's the makeup of the project on the left-hand side, and it's quite unique here in Qatar that QNRF has organized this with the right policies, with the right framework, and so on. So hence we applied for a project which is the HYPEC Hydrogen, where the concept is very simple. The concept is looking at the non-potable water sources here in Qatar and pulling together various academic partnerships so that we can come up with a hybrid reactor which can utilize the abundant sun or the electricity and create hydrogen. Yeah. So the project has 4 goals. One, to come up with the long-lasting photo hybrid catalyst. Another one focusing on the benchtop reactor that is suitable for a scale-up. Finally, we would like to have a scaled-up project, a pilot, and then also systems integration and techno-economics. So for this, we pulled a team together, again, distributed in different parts of the world, within Shell and outside in academia as well, where Dr. Dabi Al-Mohanadi is leading the concept development and systems integration. Dr. Santosh Kumar Babu is leading from National Chemical Laboratories an effort in catalyst development. Dr. Konstantinos, whom you would be hearing in this present in this hour as well, is leading the reactor development, and I will be championing the overall project and also leading the pilot development in Qatar. So we are in our first year of, we have just completed our first year of project, and what we have sustained thus far is we've mapped out the water resources that can be utilized for utilizing in this hydrogen HIPEC project, and we have gotten the experimental setup ready, where we have seen the first indication of hydrogen. Also, some background work has been completed to come up with a suitable photoelectrochemical hybrid reactor concepts that we will be looking into pilot. 2020 has, of course, been quite challenging for research as well. Specifically, our efforts of catalyst development in India have been quite severely challenged by the pandemic. However, we have had good leads that we can generate a catalyst, an organic catalyst that we can utilize in this project. As I mentioned, the ultimate goal is, of course, to utilize, to build a pilot outside, which would be demonstrating this photochemical hydrogen production from non-potable water sources in the pilot lands here in Qatar Science and Technology Park. And my sincere acknowledgement to QNRF and to my colleagues within Shell, Texas A&M Qatar, and National Chemical Laboratories for the project. Also, I would like to mention that this is not one project that we are leading or we are participating as Shell. Using the construct that QNRF has really provided and been incentivized by the policies here in Qatar, we have really taken this into heart. And you can see the numbers on the right-hand side. So in the space of gas conversion, we are leading. We are participating in 9 projects. You will hear from Dr. Ahmed Abdul Wahab as well, where Shell is participating. In gas conversion, we have now 2 projects that we are leading as an industry. In products and technology effort, where we look at various products of the future, we are participating in 3 and leading 1 project in the space of sustainability. In asset integrity, specifically on the corrosion space and things like high temperature hydrogen attack and so on, we are participating in 8 projects, of which 1 we are leading. So my highlight here is about the public-private partnership that is really possible here in Qatar. Thanks, Dr. Omar. Over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. Actually, you're ahead of time. Thank you so much, Dr. Drove. So moving forward, I will keep the questions for this session all the way at the end, so we can ask our scientists. Moving forward to the next one, it's the presentation to be done by Professor Ahmed Abdul Wahab. Professor Abdul Wahab is a professor of chemical engineering at Texas A&M University at Qatar. His research focuses on chemical, electrochemical, and photochemical processes for environmental and energy applications. His work includes development of advanced material and processes for water and wastewater treatment, water splitting, CO2 conversion, and engineering osmosis. His research has attracted significant external funding and has led to a huge number of outcomes, papers, and publications. Dr. Abdul Wahab is an editorial board member of the Water Process Engineering and Emergent Material journals. He is also the co-founder of and technical director of Qatar Sustainable Water and Energy Utilization Initiative. Professor Abdul Wahab also will tell us about his active project. This has not been completed yet, but there is some results to show. The project is entitled Hydrogen Production from Seawater Electrolysis using highly selective earth abundant catalysts and membraneless electrolyzer. Professor Abdul Wahab.
Thank you very much, Dr. Omar. Can you hear me? Can you see the slides?
Yes, everything is okay.
Good. Thank you very much, Dr. Omar, for the kind introduction. And also, I'd like to take this opportunity and thank our previous, actually distinguished speakers who give an excellent overview about the importance of hydrogen production, especially from renewables. And this project actually started last year. It's a joint effort among 4 institutes, Texas A&M University at Qatar, jointly with Shell, and also in collaboration with the University of Toronto in Canada, and also Columbia University in the United States. So we have Dr. Ted Sargent from Canada and Dr. Daniel Esposito from Colombia. And also, before I start, I would like also to acknowledge the support from Qatar National Research Fund, the excellent support. Without actually Qatar National Research Fund won't be here today to deliver these presentations. Also, I want to mention that this project is co-funded by Shell, like Dr. Dhruv mentioned a few minutes ago. So without further ado, so let me just here my outlines for the presentation. I'll just give an introduction about water electrolysis in general very quickly. And then I'm going to talk about seawater electrolysis in terms of the challenges and opportunities, and then the rationale behind what we are doing in terms of neutral pH water electrolysis using membraneless electrolyzers. And then I'll talk about the objectives and the technical approach, and then some of the results that we have been able to obtain during the last year. Dr. Omar, this is a 1-year-old project, so we started only last year, and then I'll provide summary and some of the output and impact of the project. I will go very quickly here because this was already mentioned by the previous speakers about, like the importance of hydrogen production. And we all know that water electrolysis, especially from electricity produced by renewable energy, is a very promising, and it is the cleanest approach for hydrogen production. However, right now only 4% of the hydrogen produced worldwide is produced by water electrolysis. And the reason for that, as you can see here on the right hand side, that the cost for water electrolysis is actually expensive compared to the other technologies like gas and coal. And this is mainly because the energy cost, because the electricity cost. But also, as we see that the cost of electricity, and also as our distinguished speaker mentioned, that the cost of renewable energy is getting actually very low. And this also favors the water electrolysis as the cost is reduced, especially also in countries like we see here. This also map was presented before, and we are here in the Middle East. You see that there are also high intensity of sunlight. In addition to that, also long duration of solar exposure. And that's also makes the cost of hydrogen from electrolysis, water electrolysis will be very cheap compared to other alternatives. So water electrolysis usually depends on pure water and fresh water as a feed, because the sensitivity of the electrolyzers to the water quality due to the membranes and the electrolyzers and also the electrolyzer component. However, fresh water is scarce in many parts in the world, especially actually in parts that have high solar intensity. So you see that these are arid regions and they don't have much fresh water, but these areas, they have abundance of seawater. And if seawater can be used for water electrolysis to produce hydrogen, this will actually alleviate the stress on freshwater resources for this purpose. One advantage of using fresh seawater, it is natural electrolyte. So when you do water electrolysis, you need high conductivity, and because seawater has high total dissolved solids, so this works as a natural electrolyte and or save the cost that you would pay for buffering. However, there are some challenges with using seawater for water electrolysis. The first and the most important one is the chlorine evolution reaction. We know that seawater has chloride in it, and when chloride is oxidized to produce chlorine, this competes with the water oxidation to produce oxygen, because chloride oxidation involves only 2 electron transfer steps here, but oxygen production involve 4 electron proton transfer steps. So this makes the chlorine kinetically more favorable than oxygen, but thermodynamically less favorable than oxygen. Right? So chlorine is important product. We need chlorine in many applications, but we don't need as much. So if you see this figure here, shows the hydrogen demand and the chlorine demand. So about 74, this based on 2018, 65. But for the stoichiometric amount of chlorine that you would produce with this amount of hydrogen, we produce significant amount of chlorine, which we don't need. And also we know that chlorine is toxic and harmful to the environment. So we don't want to produce it if we don't need it. So how do we address this problem is basically to either operate below the thermodynamic limit for chlorine production, which is basically around 1.72 volts. And this would require very highly efficient electrocatalysis. And the other option is to produce catalysts that are more selective to oxygen rather than chlorine. And another alternative also that is also part of our project is to do coating for the catalyst to prevent chloride from going into the catalyst and make it selective to water. Another challenge with using seawater is the formation of precipitates from calcium and magnesium. We know that seawater also has calcium and magnesium, and especially in alkaline conditions. And this is actually the conventional electrolysis process, usually is done in alkaline condition. That's the most common and cost-effective technology that is done now. And the problem with that, when you use the seawater, you precipitate magnesium hydroxide and calcium hydroxide. And the possible solution for that is either remove them from the water before use, but this requires the additions of chemical reagents, solid waste production, and also pH adjustment sometimes. The other alternative, which is desirable actually, regardless if you work with seawater or with fresh water, because fresh water also basically there are some challenges related to working in alkaline and acidic that we will talk about briefly later on. So another desirable option is to work at neutral or near neutral pH. And why is that? Because then we will avoid salt precipitation. It will enable also the use of low-cost, earth-abundant electrocatalysts that are unstable usually in acidic or alkaline environment. It will also enable the use of inexpensive equipment that would normally corrode and deteriorate in basic or acidic environments. Additionally, it will avoid the use of high concentration of acid or base electrolytes. You need a small amount of buffer since you already have the water is a natural electrolyte, and also it will minimize the environmental and safety issues that are associated with severe alkaline and severe acidic conditions. Another challenge, and the last one, is basically the degradation of membranes in the electrolyzers, because the membranes are very sensitive to water quality, and about 50% actually of the capital electrolyzer cost is mainly related to the membrane cost. One solution for that, which is also part of our project, is to use membraneless electrolyzers, so which is electrolyzers that do not have membranes. And this is one of what we are planning to use, which we call it the flow-through mesh flow-through electrode system. When you have a mesh here, this is not membrane, it's just a mesh, and then you have the catalyst at the outer surface of the mesh, so the water flow in this direction, and then as it goes out, it gets reduced in this side and gets oxidized in this side to oxygenate the hydrogen. This shows demonstration for the project's team work. Dr. Daniel is specific for membraneless electrolyzer. As you can see in here, there is no mixing, and this is a major issue that you would worry about when you have membraneless electrolyzer, is the mixing between oxygen and the hydrogen. You can see here the mixing is minimized, and the hydrogen is coming and separated from the oxygen here. So motivated by these challenges and these opportunities for seawater electrolysis and water electrolysis in general, we designed the objectives of our project to be like fivefold, like we see it in here. First, to design and fabricate pH neutral electrocatalysts, and then to code these catalysts in order to suppress the chlorine evolution reaction. And then we take these, the optimized one, and evaluate their performance in 3 electrode cell, and then to the most promising one we take and convert in membraneless electrolyzer, and then at the end we conduct techno-economic and life cycle analysis of the proposed technology. So talking about the catalyst and the working at near neutral or neutral pH, this is also challenging from the electrocatalyst point of view, because If you talk about oxygen evolution reaction, you would need alkaline conditions because you have the hydroxide as a main reactor. When you talk about the hydrogen evolution reaction, you would need the hydrogen ion as a reactant because that makes the process very kinetically easier. However, in neutral conditions, you have the water as a reactant, and this incorporates additional water dissociation steps as we can see in here. So we have to dissociate the water first in the first step before we can do anything else. And this makes also the process sluggish and kinetically limited, and it is actually more limited with the oxygen evolution reaction because the reasons that I talked about, which is for electron transfer, in addition to the water dissociation step. So people have been working, actually there have been numerous of electrocatalysts that have been developed in the past and still being developed, but the majority of those focused on either acidic or alkaline conditions, and still the most actually efficient ones are the ones that are based on noble metals or noble metal oxides. There have been some effort to produce inexpensive earth abundant metal and metal oxides based electrocatalysts, but not much has been done on neutral pH water electrolysis. However, motivated by our research team, basically we found that when you use transition metal oxides, multi metals like, for example, cobalt, iron, and nickel, and you use a combination of these, this helps actually to optimize the electronic structure and to modulate the surface of the catalyst and enhance its activity. Especially at near neutral pH, we found that when you do non-metal catalyst, this will help much because when you have the metal catalyst, especially the transition metals, they try to have lower valence oxidation state at neutral pH conditions, which is not preferable for oxygen evolution. So adding non-metal dopants enhance actually and help them to promote them to higher oxidation state. And promoted by this, we use the solution combustion synthesis method, which was actually a collaboration between Shell and FitchSolution here for this method. The solution combustion synthesis was synthesized at Shell, and then we took it from there and then modified the cobalt oxide, and we doped it with iron and also with non-metals such as sulfur and boron using wet chemistry method. And this actually catalyst has shown very good activity towards oxygen evolution reaction. This actually compared with different types of catalysts with different combinations, and we can see this one, the red one, is the one that is doped with both boron and sulfur together, and we found this actually, this is very actually good activity, and also with the seawater achieved very high activity here, very low potential at high current density. And this is an alkaline condition, and with the seawater, you can see there is no difference. The dotted line at seawater, there is no much difference between the performance of pure water. And the reason we did some characteristics, and the reason for that was mainly due to the enhanced surface, electrochemical surface area of the catalyst, and also the amorphicity of the surface of the catalyst. We did the work at neutral pH as well, and we did the stability test, and the catalyst, as you can see here, was very stable, and we found that the sulfur boron dope one is actually highly efficient compared to the only sulfur doped one in neutral conditions. Also for the HER or the hydrogen evolution reaction catalyst, we also use the hypothesis that when you use a strong hydrogen binding metal with a strong hydroxide binding metal hydroxide, this will enable the water dissociation process in order to facilitate the hydrogen evolution reaction. And we did that by synthesizing again early transition metal oxynitrides on the surface of nickel foam, and we use hydrothermal method for that. And here I just jump to the results right away because for the sake of time. And this showed actually the results of different pH conditions. And as you can see, this stars here is the results of our work, and the others here, as you can see that in some cases we have actually achieved very, very good performance especially here, as you can see with the vanadium doped catalyst as well. Also, for the effect of the seawater, of the chloride in seawater and other elements, you can see here there is not much difference in the activity between the pure water and seawater. Finally, this is about the coating of the catalyst. This shows also the results for, we do like a silicon oxide coating on the surface of the catalyst. It's ultra thin layer in order to prevent chloride from reaching to the catalyst and only allows water to reach. And you can see here, this shows actually the results here with actually the one that has the coating and the one that does not have the coating. And we can see that actually the very good performance here when we have the coating with the silicon oxide. In summary, I would like to summarize by saying that operation at neutral conditions is desired regardless of the source water. Also, membranous electrolyzers could decrease materials and manufacturing costs, and they are more durable in harsh operating environments. Also, the sulfur boron doped multi-metal oxy hydroxides and also the oxynitrides provided good efficiency and stability for oxygen evolution reaction. That's in terms of the oxyhydroxides, and for hydrogen evolution reaction in terms of the oxynitrides. And also encapsulation with ultra-thin permeable overlayer prevented chloride from reaching to the catalyst and make it selective to oxygen evolution. In terms of output and impact, we so far, again, thanks to the general support from Qatar National Research Fund, during the first year we have been able to publish 5 papers. We have 4 articles under review now by journals. We are working on 3 additional articles and 1 disclosure application that we plan to file soon. We have 3 graduate students and 7 undergraduate students are involved in the project. We have 7 postdoctoral research associates in the 3 different academic institutes. And also the most important thing is the synergy and the collaboration between academia and industry, as Dr. Dhruv mentioned a few minutes ago. And finally, I would like to acknowledge the team members from Texas A&M University of Qatar, from University of Toronto, from Columbia University, from Shell, and also acknowledge the general support from Qatar National Research Fund and also the co-funding from Shell. And by this, I will conclude, and thank you very much, and I will turn it over to you, Dr.
Thank you. Thanks, Professor Abdul Wahab. So much work has been done for a 1-year old project, indeed. Excellent. Please stay with us for the Q&A session. As I move now to the next speaker, Dr. Konstantinos Kakosimos. Dr. Konstantinos is an associate professor of chemical engineering and the Dean's Fellow of Multiversity at Texas A&M University at Qatar. He received his PhD from Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, Greece. His main research activities are focused on the development and application of tools needed to improve and sustain the quality of environment, including environmental fluid mechanics, monitoring of air quality, solar, photo and thermochemical processes, reactors, material science, etc. Moreover, he explores new educational methods and techniques for which he received the 2015 Hutchinson Chemical Engineering Hutchinson Medal. He also the recipient of 2016 Research Laboratory Safety, 2017 Research Excellence and Early Career Faculty. Dr. Kostas will tell us about his completed project. So this project has been already completed. It's entitled Solar Hybrid Hydrogen Production Cycle in situ with in situ thermal energy storage. Dr. Kostas, please confine your presentation to 15 minutes max. Thank you. We are not hearing you, Dr. Kostas.
Good. Apologies for this. I had to unmute. I said that thank you very much, Dr. Omar, for the nice introduction, and of course, every other speaker for laying out the ground of this. Indeed, I'm going to talk about a project that completed some time ago, and that's why I'm also referring to this as the legacy of the project. So this was a collaboration with Texas A&M main campus, and of course, the Florida Solar Energy Research Center, where they gave us the starting point of the project. I will go briefly through the rationale of the project, what was the approach, of course, some of the main findings and conclusions, but most importantly, as I said, the outcomes which are considered to be the seed of this project. So, as you heard already from Dr. Abdulwahab, the electrolytic process is a straightforward process when we want to use renewable energy resources to produce hydrogen. We utilize sunlight, we convert it to electrons, and then we split water. Now, for the photocatalytic process, then actually we need to do one extra step. We require a catalyst that this is the case now utilizes the sunlight, photons to make the electrons, and actually now split water. Of course, the process is more complicated than this animation, but in any case, to drive it forward and release hydrogen, we require a sacrificial agent. Now, if we replenish water from one side and the sacrificial agent from the other side, we can have a continuous stream of hydrogen produced. Now, to make it sustainable, it has to be a cycle, which requires to regenerate the sacrificial agent by using extra sunlight in this specific project. And then we have what we call a water splitting cycle. The keyword on hybrid comes from the fact that we want to use both, or we actually achieve to use both the photon energy and the hydrogen and the thermal energy coming from the sunlight. So why we did this project in Qatar and what was the central part of this? Well, as you heard already, there is plenty of sunlight, but the idea is that when we consider concentrated solar, most times we limit it to the concentrated solar power, which is a conversion of sunlight to thermal. However, when we want to utilize the whole spectrum of the sun, then this process can become more beneficial for most cases around the world that have plenty of sunlight, regardless of the aerosol problems that we see in these regions like North Africa and Middle East. So the core of the project, as I said, is this flowchart. We have one side in the photochemical step where we utilize the UV in the visible spectrum of the sunlight to drive the hydrogen evolution reaction. Practically taking water, adding a sacrificial agent, which is in this specific case was an ammonium sulfide, and produce hydrogen. To make this a cycle, or actually to complete the process, we need to release oxygen in another step. So what we do then, we use the rest of the spectrum of the sunlight in a series of thermochemical steps to regenerate the sacrificial agent and release oxygen. And now this becomes a complete water splitting cycle. The process is slightly complicated because it's now not only one step that we have in the electrolysis, but multiple steps. But the idea is now becomes thermodynamically favorable if you go to these higher temperatures. The regeneration utilizes some extra salts, as we see in this picture, some sulfates and some pyrosulfate salts. And the requirement of these large quantities of salts give us an extra benefit. We can use the salt to store thermal energy to drive the process when there is no sunlight available. And this was, in briefly, the central idea of our project. Now, again, the hybrid part was also one of the innovative components of the project. The photochemical part, we made some early estimations that we require around 18% of the energy to drive the hydrogen evolution. To do this, then we designed a catalyst that more or less operates around the 520 nanometers. The rest of the part of the solar spectrum can be used or was used to drive the thermochemical processes. Now, the sunlight spectrum you see here is the ideal one, what we usually call one sun energy. However, for areas like Qatar or where there is a lot of dust aerosol, the spectrum might end up being quite lower suppressed because of this, and also might end up being more biased or drifted to other wavelengths. This is something that we incorporated later on in our studies for the process design. So again, to explain one more in a more detailed view, what are the core of the reactions here, we studied these 5 or 6 reactions, depending how you count. The first one, the blue one, number 2, is on the photochemical step, very straightforward process. But the other one is a multi-step process that requires a little bit more complicated studies. So for the hydrogen evolution, what we call the photocatalytic water splitting, we designed a catalyst based on cadmium sulfide and zinc sulfide. This is called the binary band gap catalyst because it utilizes 2 semiconductors. And then we also use the platinum as a co-catalyst to accelerate the process and achieve higher rates. During the duration of the project, we apart from synthesizing, characterizing the catalyst, we actually conducted plenty of experiments to develop the kinetics and also understand what are the optimum conditions of this catalyst and reactor. For what is the catalyst loading, how much light it can utilize, and so on. One of the key findings that became the seed for further projects is the idea that the catalyst can utilize more sunlight, more energy than the typical testing conditions in a laboratory setup. For the thermodynamic part, or for the oxygen evolution part, we utilized thermodynamic calculations and developing mechanistic models by conducting both numerical calculations and lab scale experiments in high temperature furnaces. The concept here was to find what are the sweet spot, what are the appropriate temperatures to conduct the high temperature thermochemical steps. Now, one extra requirement here is that if we want to see this process happening in a real setup, then the whole stream have to be in the liquid state. So there was a lot of work on this part, how to figure out what conditions we have these solid solutions in the liquid state. As I said before, by intensive numerical calculations and laboratory experiments, we were able to identify these gray areas, which are the temperatures where we can conduct the 3 thermochemical steps. Now, when you put everything together, we can design the process. We have the hydrogen subcycle, the photochemical step that has a 25% photon to hydrogen efficiency. And then we have the oxygen subcycle that requires now large amounts of the molten salts I mentioned. However, this can also be used for the storage of the energy. We put all things together in this simulation and can now tweak it and figure out where are the differences on the design and what are the weaknesses on this. So as it came up, the large quantities that we use for the molten salts, which in the beginning we thought that this is one of the innovations and very, very key parts of the project, end up to being the weakest part of the project. So in the next phase, what we did, we decided that why we need to have all of this in the liquid phase? Why don't do this in the aerosol phase, where practically have small particles starting as solids and then becoming liquid particles to drive and realize all the solar thermochemical steps. We developed a conceptual model, as you can see in this animation, where we have the particles starting as the coming from the chemical step, and practically as we increase the temperature, we end up realizing all the different reactions. This end up being a seed for a bigger idea, a bigger concept that we call the aerosol synthesis. In between that, however, as you may know, solar thermochemical reactions have very high temperatures and very big requirements on the stability of the materials. To be able to characterize this, we developed a new setup in our laboratory that again became a seed for a different work on testing the aging of these materials. We call this accelerating aging and optical characterization because we can figure out for any material coming out from the very small quantities in the lab, how this will behave when it's going to go to a real case. Actually, for this specific work, we were one of the first ones reporting that a new family of ceramics, the ones we call max phase ceramics, can be utilized in solar thermochemical applications. Now, as I said before, the seed of this project are more projects and more people being trained on that. So we started with a very standard photocatalytic setup that now evolved to become the seed for many different photocatalytic setups, and one of them was mentioned earlier by Dr. Aurora. The photocatalysis outcomes became the seed for 2 NPRP projects, 2 QNRF projects, and 1 internal project. The experience we gained from the high flux solar simulations and of course the experiment end up internally getting this very impressive facility. This is a high flux simulator, which is probably still the only one in the Middle East and North Africa region. And we can now realize close to pilot scale thermochemical experiments. Again, the seed for more work and more projects to come. The accelerated aging I mentioned before became a nice disclosure, and now we are trying to find out industrial partners to utilize this technology. We found applications beyond the photocatalysis. We found applications in paints, in practically any material exposed to sunlight, because these materials degrade over time. And our method ended up being 2,000 times faster than the current accelerating aging methods. Of course, we can only realize it now in the lab, but we're looking for opportunities to make it a standalone project. And again, at the end, as I said, everything we learned from the previous project became now the whole idea of the solar aerosol synthesis. Concentrated light can also be used beyond driving simple standard reactions that we know so far. Can drive many different, more complicated steps that may be required for hydrogen production if we go to a more advanced cycles. Again, for the sake of time, I would like to close it here and thank, of course, the two mentors of the project, Dr. Srinivasa and Dr. Muratov, that helped me initiate my research in hydrogen production, of course, on solar thermochemical and photochemical steps. The students that we trained through the project, during the duration, we had almost 7 undergraduate students involved and 3 master students completing the studies through the project, 1 PhD student and 1 postdoctoral fellow that actually now is a faculty. We published a decent amount of papers, but again, as I said, this project was for us the seed for many more ideas for funding and also research. With that, again, I would like to close and thank everybody that supported this project, but of course, Qatar Foundation for the generous support. Thank you, Dr. Omar.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Dr. Costas, very much indeed. You are done in 20 minutes, basically. Thank you so much. So moving forward, and stay with us, please, for the Q&A. The last now presentation in this R&D technical session is coming from Dr. Raoul Boussaid. He is an associate professor in the Department of Chemical Engineering in Qatar University. He received his PhD in Chemical and Biological Engineering in 2012 from South Dakota School of Mines and Technology in the United States. Before joining Qatar University, he gained postdoctoral experience at Paul Scherrer Institute in Switzerland. So his research focuses on solar fuel production, catalysis and metals, CO2 capture and utilization, energy storage and batteries, desalination, bioenergy and products, wastewater treatment, thermodynamics. He is a recipient of several awards, such as Excellence in Research Award, Mines Medal Fellowship, Best Undergraduate Student Award, Junior Research Fellowship. He is currently serving as Associate Editor of Frontiers in Energy Research. Besides, he served as the guest editor of International Journals of Hydrogen Energy, the National Journal of Energy Research. So Dr. Boussaid will tell us about his completed project entitled Hydrogen and Syngas Production from Two-Step Solar Thermochemical Catalytic CO2 Reforming of Qatari Natural Gas. Dr. Boussaid, within 15 minutes, please. You may want to unmute yourself. Huh?
Yeah, can you hear me now? Thank you, Dr. Omar, for the nice introduction, and I'll try to be a bit quick because everyone must be bored now by listening to hydrogen. So basically, this project was about the production of hydrogen and syngas by using either water splitting or CO2 splitting or a combine of methane reforming also. This project was in collaboration with the University of Florida. They did the solar part. Here we did the materials part. So as we know now, hydrogen is the main thing for this energy sector. So basically what we decided that instead of using the oil, coal and gas because it is having issues with the CO2 and resources are limited, we decided to produce the hydrogen and also the syngas from water, CO2 and methane is used in one of the steps. And to run these high temperature reactions, we use the solar energy. So basically, we are using solar energy to drive the reactions, to convert the water into hydrogen and CO2 into CO, and then we mix them together to form the syngas. And the syngas will be used for the production of liquid transportation fuels. The cycle or the reactions which we have used is metal oxide based thermochemical reaction. As you can see here, in one step, we reduce the metal oxide, we remove the oxygen. So, and in the next step, the reduced metal oxide is reoxidized by using the CO2 and H2 as the feed. And that results into the production of hydrogen and CO. The metal oxides are not consumed. So basically they can be recycled. So once you dump a certain amount of metal oxide in the reactor, you don't have to replace it for multiple cycles. So basically the overall reaction chemistry is that we are using solar energy to produce the fuel. This looks good, but there are several challenges. The main challenge is the material aspect, because the materials which the investigators are using around the world, these are limited to Syria or some specific ferrites or some specific perovskites. So this project was divided into two parts. In the first part, we explored different materials and try to find out the best possible option which can help us to produce the higher amount of fuel. And also the second part was about the actual solar reaction. So instead of doing the lab scale high temperature by using the high temperature furnace, we use the solar energy to drive the reaction. So that was the main idea behind the project. Now, in terms of materials, there are two types of materials usually used in thermochemical cycles. One is the volatile metal oxides, which include zinc oxide cycle, tin oxide cycle, and then non-volatile, which is ferrites, doped Syria, and perovskites. And nowadays, all the researchers in this field are focusing on the non-volatile metal oxides because these are easy to handle and they doesn't go into the gas phase. So quenching and other extra steps are not needed. So that's why we decided to focus on these three actually: ferrites, doped Syria, and perovskites. So in the first part of the presentation now, I will show you some results of basically in terms of ferrites and Syria and perovskites, which includes the synthesis, the characterization, and also the fuel production capacity. And then at the end, I will show you the solar experiments in which we use the methane also. So in case of ferrites, we use sol gel method. Basically, we use sol gel, co-precipitation, and combustion synthesis method. So because I'm focusing sol gel more on ferrites, so I'm showing the sol gel aspect here. Here we use the precursors, nitrate precursors. We use the propylene oxide as the gelation agent, and after the gel formation is done, drying is done, and then the materials are calcined. And at the end, you can see this. This is the gel. It looks like it's very strong, so it's not flowing. So we are able to find a good amount of, good quality of gel in that case. Then after doing that, we first thing we did is we found out the phase composition, because it is important to generate the required phase. So these are, for example, examples like we did nickel ferrite around 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 materials. In cobalt ferrite also we did 6 materials. So we changed the composition by varying the concentrations of nickel and iron. So these are the XRDs. After that, we checked the SEM analysis and TM analysis also of these materials. Our aim was to produce the nanomaterials because that will give you more surface area for the reactions, and successfully we were able to do that. So the first picture is about the nickel ferrite nanoparticles, and the second picture is about the cobalt ferrite nanoparticles. In addition to nickel ferrite and cobalt ferrite, we did the magnesium ferrite, the manganese ferrite, and other ferrites also, but not listed here because of the time. Then we used a high temperature TGA setup. It's actually, this picture is only showing the TGA. The next picture will show the setup. In this, basically, this is from Setaram, France. This TGA is capable of handling the methane also. So that's why we use this one. And then we use this TGA and we developed this reactor setup, in which the TGA is the main thing. And then we have the mass flow controllers. We have the gases coming in, we have the chiller, which is required for the operation of the TGA, and then the gases were sent to the gas analyzers. So basically, we did two-way calculations, one by doing the weight balance, and the second one by doing the gas analysis to find out how much oxygen is released and how much hydrogen or CO is produced. These are the typical TGA plots. So here, this black line indicates the temperature. So based on the literature survey, we understood that most of the researchers are focusing the reduction step at 1400 degrees Celsius, and the oxidation was at 1000 degrees Celsius. So to compare our materials with the previous investigated materials, we decided to keep the same temperatures, 1400 for the reduction and 1000 for the splitting. But in addition to that, we did some other experiments in which we tried to reduce the temperatures also for the specific selected materials. So these are, like, for example, this green, red, and blue. These are the TGA variations. For example, in the reduction, because the oxygen is coming out of the material, the weight loss was recorded. And during the oxidation, the material will pick up the oxygen again from water and CO2. So we have the weight pickup. So based on that, we can easily find out how much fuel is produced. These are the plots. For example, this is for nickel ferrite. You can see the left-hand side is how much oxygen is released, micromoles per gram per cycle for each nickel ferrite. And then on the right-hand side, we have the hydrogen or CO, depending on which reactions we cover, we did. So basically, we understood that this NiFe2O4, which is termed as NiF10, is capable of producing higher amount of oxygen and CO and hydrogen also as compared to the other nickel ferrite, which is expected because the phase composition plays a very important role in these reactions. Similar to the nickel ferrite, we tested the cobalt ferrite. Again, in case of cobalt ferrite, you can see that COFe2O for the last one looks good, and this looks better than the nickel because nickel was doing around 64.4 oxygen and 125.9 hydrogen. Here it's 72.7 and 139, so a little bit better than nickel ferrite, but you will see that we have better materials also in the later stages. After doing this reaction, there was one more aspect which was important, that to check the phase stability, that if these materials are stable or not. By the way, one thing I forgot to mention, that we did around 10 cycles for each material. So we are not testing each material only in one step. We are testing the materials like at least for 10 cycles to see the reproducibility of that material, because as I said, the metal oxides can be used in multiple cycles. So the plan, the long-term plan is to do the 1,000 or more than that cycles, but in lab scale, we are limited and we have to test the other materials also. So we did only 10 cycles to do that. In the material stability, we understood that as prepared material, after 5 cycles, after 10 cycles, after 20 cycles, the material remains the same. I mean, the main structure of the material is remain the same and it doesn't break. So that shows that the materials are stable. Same thing was recorded for cobalt ferrite as well. As I said, in addition to nickel and cobalt, we did the magnesium and nickel magnesium ferrite also. These are already published data available in the literature. After doing the ferrites, we focused on the ceria also. Now in ceria, basically people are using the pure ceria, CEO2, as the base material, and then they try to dope them to improve the oxygen yield or the hydrogen yield. So we use the co-precipitation of hydroxide method. This is the flow, you can see the process. This is the furnace at the end we calcine. These are the XRDs here for each. This actually we did here. Sorry, I'm not able to see this. But this is here we did the transition metal doped ceria. So we dope nickel, zinc, manganese, iron, copper, chromium, cobalt, and zircon. So multiple metals were doped. See, these are the TGS cycles for each material. We put them in one picture so you can easily see the comparison of each material in terms of cycles. Then we found out the numbers. We after calculation, we understood that in case of oxygen release, the doping of zinc, iron, and chromium actually improve the oxygen release, not that significantly, but yes, better than the ceria. And in case of the fuel production, the zinc and iron is better. Now in the literature, zirconium is better, but that is about 25% doping. We did only 10% doping. So basically, if you go for 25, the numbers will change. Okay. Then after doing this, we did another study in ceria where we doped lanthanide series dopants. Same approach was applied with the co-precipitation of hydroxide method. These are the XRDs. XRDs showing that we successfully synthesized. Actually, I skipped the SEM and TM images here, but they showed that we successfully synthesized the nano range particles. Again, these are the TGA plots for each material which we tested. Now here you can see the doping of lanthanide actually out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, around 10 materials, around 5 materials are better than ceria. For example, the terbium is, samarium is around producing 70 micromoles of oxygen, where the ceria was producing 48. But on the other hand, if you see the hydrogen or CO production, only the lanthanum is better, the others are worst. So what does it indicate? That it indicates that some dopants are better to improve the reduction capacity, but they are not good in terms of the reoxidation. So we are trying to find out the material which can do both. So here in this case, the lanthanum looks better because it is actually helping to improve the oxygen release as well as the hydrogen and CO production. The third part about the perovskite, which is recently explored by a lot of people. So we decided to explore that part. We used the solution combustion synthesis approach. Well, one thing which I would like to clarify here, that all these three methods can be applied for all three materials. It's not that perovskite needs solution and ferrite needs soil gel. We can do all the way, but of course the properties will change. Now here we did doping of yttrium, dysprosium, terbium, gadolinium, different lanthanide dopants in the structure of the perovskite. Here, these are the XRDs. We found out based on the SEM that because solution combustion method is usually used for the development of porous materials, so we successfully did that here. These are the TGA's plots, and in terms of numbers, you can see the PRSRMNO3 looks better than the others. I mean, others, if I compare this with Syria, for example, all these materials are better than Syria, and even in case of ferrites. So if I go back and if I check, the best ferrite was around 64. I mean, if I take the cobalt ferrite around 70. So basically, almost like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 materials are better than the ferrite. So that's why people are focusing more towards the perovskite. Also, one thing which we observed in perovskite that we can achieve a good amount of fuel production at lower temperatures. Okay, this is about the perovskite part. Then the last part about the solar experiment. So in addition to the lab scale experiment, we decided to check the actual solar experiment. This was done at University of Florida. They are by using their high flux solar simulator. This is the reactor setup, and these are the solar concentrator. Here we use only Syria because we were doing reactor development. So we decided to use the material which is already used by others. These are the summary, for example, how much reduction is done, how much oxidation is done. The main part which I want to highlight here is the efficiency. So if you check at the end, the efficiency of the process around 5.88. This is called solar to fuel energy conversion efficiency. Now,
would you conclude within 2 minutes, please?
Yes, please. 1 minute. I'll do. So regarding this, the cycling part, basically, we did around 1, 2, 3. In this picture, I can see like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cycles, and the efficiency was equal to be 10.6%. So yeah, I mean, this is only Syria. We are trying to experiment other materials also, but because of the limitations, we couldn't do that. The last slide, we would like to thank the QNRF to support this project, also the Qatar University and University of Florida. I like to thank my collaborator, Jonathan Shefe from UF and his team, and also my research team members here in Qatar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And apology for squeezing in time because we are really way beyond the timeline. To the colleagues, attendees, I was told that because of restriction of time, we will not be able really to answer all the questions, but we will answer them separately offline and post them on the website of the EU GCC. However, allow me to only allow a couple of questions to our speakers. One is addressed to Professor Abdul Wahab. Question to you, Professor Abdul Wahab. As you are doing, I mean, how long have you been doing the seawater electrolysis, and have you seen any side effect in terms of material corrosions?
Right. Yeah. I provide the answer. I typed the answer actually online, but I will repeat it again. Yeah, we did actually stability tests for the oxygen evolution reaction. We did a stability test at 1.7 voltage for 50 hours. There was the catalyst was good and stable. There was some corrosion for basically some of the catalysts, and that's why we had to optimize it. And we have seen good performance for the optimized catalyst that has both sulfur and boron doping. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Another question. I mean, whoever wants to venture to answer, please let me know. But maybe Drove, maybe fits your area. So there is a question here. Stakeholders won't pay for something unless they will profit out of it. So how would hydrogen benefit investors? Now, Drove coming from Shell, how do you answer? Dr. Drove, you are muted, huh?
He had a connection problem. He's not in right now.
Okay, how about any one of the colleagues, speakers? How would investors benefit from investing in hydrogen? Dr. Costas, Dr. Raoul?
I mean, I can talk about Cell, for example, because we have this new project with them, the one that they presented at the beginning. It's not always about producing hydrogen and sell it out, where we have this $2 per kilo, for example, price. In most cases, for them, is also an expense, and in some cases, also a driving force to become greener. And so your downstream products are also green. So we saw that in this Cell project, they are involved to learn with us and help us learn better, so we can achieve in the future more promising prices and greener products. So it's not always a tomorrow benefit, it might be many days and many weeks, many years and decades later in the future.
Yeah, thank you. And a last question, I think it's a general one from Ms. Heba Leif. Let me contextualize the question within the context, at least, of the GCC or Qatar specifically. It's why there is a dominance of the conventional technologies when it comes to hydrogen as a whole. Is it working fine, or is there a need really to come up with a new technology that suits the local conditions? Yeah, Professor Abdul Wahab.
Can you repeat the question again, Dr. Ramo?
It's the challenging facing hydrogen in general are the dominance of the conventional technologies. Right. Okay, and specifically if you apply them within a given context. Now, are they working fine? Are they producing within the local Qatari context, I would say, or bigger GCC context, or is there a need to come up with new technology that comes from within, that gets developed from within? What do you think?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I think the major concern that we all have and the whole world has is the carbon emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions, and the major effort that is being done now in order to either decarbonize or try to prevent basically the emissions from the beginning. So, and again, the working with the natural resources like natural gas and other like coal, these are the cost effective for now, but also as the electricity prices are going down and also the abundance of renewable energy in different places in the world that are getting cheaper and cheaper, I think the opportunities for the hydrogen production from these technologies will actually gain a lot of interest in the future. So the question is, what do we do with the carbon sources? I mean, I think there are also efforts that are going on now in order to still utilize the natural gas and other carbon sources, but produce environmentally benign byproducts. Like, for example, the solid kind of carbon that is produced instead of producing carbon dioxide. We produce like either carbon black or also some effort to produce also carbon nanotubes and some other kind of solid form that you can also landfill or store without polluting the environment. I'm not sure if this is answered the question.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely. Regarding that, now, what should we do with the carbon and all other platforms for the carbon? I think that's a very, very important topic, and I think it needs another seminar altogether. Thank you so much, Professor Abdelhab, and thanks to all the speakers. I'm sorry that I could not really stay more with you with the Q&A sessions, and also again, thanks to the attendees. We will be happy to answer your questions, post them online. Let me hand over to Frank for his last session. Frank, to you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Omar. Indeed, the last session, and let us be efficient because I see the number of participants dropping. So, you know, it's been a long day, but nonetheless, I think, you know, we're going to have good insights. We have a fantastic panel. We have Dr. Marcelo Constantibile, who's principal economist at the Qatar Environment and Energy Research Institute at the Hamad bin Khalifa University. Then we have Cornelius Mattes, Chief Executive Officer of DAI Desert Energy, and of course of the Man Hydrogen Alliance. Hi, Cornelius. And Martijn Koopman, Program Manager of the Energy Transition at the Port of Rotterdam, one of the major emerging hubs of hydrogen and hydrogen fuels. Martijn, I hope you're still there. There you are. Good to see you. With that, I would like to ask you each for 10 minutes. After that, I hope we have a bit of time left for a number of questions. But Dr. Marcelo, the floor is yours.
Frank, thank you very much. And yeah, being aware of time, I will keep my talk as concise as possible, and definitely within the 10 minutes. If I should exceed that time, please remind me, but I'm not planning on doing that. So sorry, I'm having some, okay, fine. So I'm assuming that you can see my slides and you can hear me okay. So I will get going. So with my talk, I'm going to reconnect to some of the discussion that we had during the first panel. And I also want to set the context for the two talks that will follow. And I want to really go a little bit back in time, in fact, because I think given all the interest and discussion and enthusiasm that there is today about hydrogen, but also the uncertainty and in some cases confusion, it's probably useful to look at the, if you like, the history of it to get a better sense of what future markets, how future markets might unfold. So, first of all, this has been said before, hydrogen energy is really not a new idea. The invention of the fuel cell, which is an electrochemical device that allows you to efficiently convert hydrogen and oxygen into power, into electricity, and it's effectively the reverse of the electrolysis process. It's been, goes back to the mid-1800s, more or less at the same time as the internal combustion engine and the lead acid battery. When they were invented, of course, we know the internal combustion engine has become obviously quite widespread starting from the beginning of the 1900s. Batteries have also found practical applications, while hydrogen and fuel cells for energy uses, we're only looking at the 1950s with space missions where hydrogen was used as a rocket fuel, and fuel cells in the 60s in space missions. But in terms of hydrogen and fuel cells being looked at, if you like, as a clean technology or as an alternative energy technology, we are effectively looking at the 1970s and at the emergence of interest for cleaner and alternative fuels for road transport. So we know in the 1960s, there was clear interest in cleaning, if you like, urban air. In the 1970s, we've had oil price shocks, and this has led to a lot of different programs, including battery electric vehicles, but also hydrogen fuel cells. And the first prototypes of passenger cars date to the 1970s, and that's when also the idea of a hydrogen economy was first put forward. Then we've had some ups and downs, but during the 1990s, a few demonstration projects started involving hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, both buses and cars, and that's when the California zero emission vehicle mandate came in, which effectively paved the way for today's, if you like, electric vehicle revolution. It's also worth noting that as a result of the zero emission vehicle mandate in California, around 1995, the California Fuel Cell Partnership began, which brought together oil and gas companies with car manufacturers and government. So that's when effectively you can already see quite a strong evidence of collaboration among the different stakeholders to make this a reality. Now, beyond that, late 90s to today, I think one useful concept that we might want to introduce here to explain some of what we've seen is the idea of hype cycle. So a hype cycle is when effectively a technology goes through phases where there are overinflated expectations about what it can do and when it can do it, followed by phases of disillusionment where perhaps the perception of the technology is worse than the technology actually can do. And we have seen a few technologies go through hype cycles, including hydrogen fuel cells. On this diagram, which I made years ago for my students at Imperial College, I have batteries, I have hydrogen fuel cells, and I have biofuels. And these mostly pertain to, but not only, the focus back then was mostly on road transport. So we've seen battery come and go and then come back. And then we have seen a lot of effort around hydrogen fuel cells in the first part of the 2000s, where a lot of funding has gone into it, but also lots of work has gone into all sorts of aspects, from planning the infrastructure, building roadmaps, building public-private partnerships, addressing the regulatory barriers, the safety barriers, and so on. And although that strong push did not really materialize in terms of large-scale rollout of hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, it has certainly paved the way for what we are seeing today. And quite a few companies, technology developers, were born out of that strong push, and they're still around today. And all the technological advances that they brought with them are now available. And it has to be said that even if the emphasis on hydrogen has gone away, certainly the activities of industry and government have continued, although in some cases with less, rich budgets. Now, since then, I guess the emphasis has shifted from hydrogen fuel cell vehicles to hydrogen per se. And over the last few years, we have seen a very strong resurgence of hydrogen, and perhaps less so at this stage of the hydrogen fuel cell discourse. And I think it's safe to say that today we are going through yet another phase of hype, but I'll go back to that later. So the vision today for a hydrogen economy has somewhat evolved. It's not completely different from what we had before, but it's a vision where hydrogen, again, can be produced from a number of sources, and it can be transmitted in different ways, including mixing it in the natural gas grid. And then it can be used in those sectors that are seen as most difficult to decarbonize, which include transport of various kinds, heavy-duty transport on road, ships, and aviation. It also comprises industry and heat in industry and the residential sector. Hydrogen produced at scale can also be used to store renewable energy and feed it back, even store it over a long period of time. So although hydrogen is seen as like a really a unique means for decarbonizing some difficult sectors, the real value of hydrogen is realized when you go beyond the specific sector and you look at the whole energy system. So for hydrogen technologies to really be competitive and deliver their own value, you need to reach the full scale and have it integrated in the energy system as a whole. But if you look at what we have today,
you've spoken 8 minutes.
Okay, very good. I'll move on very quickly. So the market today exists, but it's mostly non-energy. So it's oil refinery, ammonia, and other uses, which provides an opportunity because this is quite substantial in terms of emission. It needs to be decarbonized. The emissions of this sector has been estimated to be as the combination of UK and Indonesia together. So if we are looking at developing this vision of the hydrogen economy, we need to first decarbonize the markets that we have today, and then introduce hydrogen in a number of different sectors, each one of them with their challenges, and we have to do it rapidly. So this is the vision, these are the scenarios. It will require moving from today's fossil fuel-based production to clean hydrogen production. And in terms of investment, of course, all this will require a large-scale investment, And today there are a lot of, if you like, announcements about new projects and so on, and targets that follow from commitments from governments and industry. And this is quite promising. But some of the headline numbers that we see are about investment that is yet to materialize. Of course, there are some investments happening, which is encouraging, and they are on a scale that is bigger than before. There are projects in the planning phase, and there are a number of projects that could or could not materialize and the investment to go with it. The early, if you like, opportunities lie in industrial areas and ports where the demand is already there, and there is no requirement for major infrastructure. However, we're still looking at this stage today projects that are pre-commercial or large-scale demonstration. We need more policy, if you like, support to get this to the commercial phase. And then there is transport, especially trucks, trains, and ships that are also promising in terms of the economics. But again, a lot need to happen in terms of the policy framework and incentives around them for this to become fully commercial. And longer term, we have still in the picture passenger cars, heat, and even longer term aviation, perhaps. I want to conclude just by saying that it is, yes, probably the case that today we are going through yet another phase of hype. However, we have a lot of work to build on, not just in the technology sphere, but also in the policy and regulatory sphere. We understand the challenges a lot more than we used to do. We also see investment on a bigger scale, and on a political level, hydrogen has gone up the agenda for sure, relative to the past. And there are clear opportunities to scale up the use of hydrogen in ports and in industry, which was different from what we were looking at before in terms of transport, and it's in a way it's easier. But we're still facing regulatory and policy barriers that need to be removed. Plus, we need a strong, clear policy framework to really enable the investment from the private sector that is actually needed. And so I will conclude by saying targets might come and go, and the vision that we have today might turn into something different. And there is still a lot of uncertainty, but hydrogen over the last decade has certainly been on an upward trajectory. So it is probably more of a case of when than if. So I would like to leave it at that. Sorry for overrunning slightly.
Thanks, Dr. Marcello, for these great insights and a beautiful overview, which provides some segues into the next two speakers. With that, I would like to give the floor to my friend Cornelius Mattes, who is CEO of DI Desert Energy and also the founder of the MENA Hydrogen Alliance. Cornelius, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Frank. Let me just share the screen. Can you see my presentation? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but your presentation is not on.
One moment. Let me try again.
There is something coming. Yep. Full screen, and then you're good to go.
Here we go. Thank you so much, Frank, and congrats to the whole team. I think this is really a very interesting seminar, great lineup, wonderful topics, and I think Marcello gave an amazing overview on all history applications on hydrogen and so on and so forth. So let me be very concise. The main two topics is to explain you about our joint activities with the MENA Hydrogen Alliance, and then talk about some of the projects here in the region, so what's going on, to see where the hydrogen will actually come from for international markets, transport, so on and so forth. So just briefly on DI. So DI Desert Energy has been around since 2009. First, let's say fighting for renewables, trying to create market conditions for solar and wind projects here. And looking back, obviously, over the last decade, this has become a great success story. And we've started already around 5 years ago, also thanks to Frank's and Ad van Wijk's initiative on hydrogen. And last year, indeed, we jointly set up the MENA Hydrogen Alliance. And well, we are based out of Dubai. We are a public-private sector network. We are a think tank doing studies and obviously trying really to make an impact to accelerate the energy transition. Well, the group had kind of a revival. DI went through different phases from Desertec 1.0 to Desertec 3.0. So Desertec 3.0 is all about green electrons, green molecules, and you know, making here the local region as a powerhouse for green electrons and green molecules, local markets, local value creation, stability, prosperity, jobs, and of course the energy transition. That's what it's all about. Well, recently, as I said, quite a revival. So over the last 2 years, the network grew again, you know, to around 50 companies from 25 countries, and compared to earlier years, DI is much more international and much more rooted in MENA. That's some of our cooperation partners. So this is in the spirit we are working with our different partners here, different organizations, and our advisory board as well, which has a few industry captains like CEOs of Aqua Power, Mazda, or Peter Terium from Neom, or Khalid Al-Zayani from Bahrain, just to make a few names. Now, it is very important, so I come to the green molecule topic, but obviously still today, DI is really a think tank on the energy transition from a holistic point of view. So it is of course all about renewable generation, which has become a massive success story. It is about grids, integration, it is about storage, and we've worked a lot in this field, and the demand side is extremely important as well. So on energy efficiency, on flexibility for the system, and green molecules offer a completely new perspective, because this is now the chance to transport huge amounts of energy over long distances, which with HVDC lines would have been possible only to a limited degree. And it creates literally completely, let's say, a new sector of green electrons, in addition to the green electrons coming from the power sector. So that's the beauty about green molecules, you know, that it boosts the energy transition, and it creates all these new opportunities. Now, this is why we are all here, and why also there is a bit of a hype almost. You need to bring down to more realistic reasons. So the development over the last 10 years, or it's 8 years here, with solar, but there was an equal success story on wind, on prices. You know, this makes the whole hydrogen revolution possible, because this is really the game changer for why everybody talks about green hydrogen today, because 2/3 of the cost of a kilogram of green hydrogen is approximately the cost of electricity and hence renewable generation. 1/3 is the electrolyzer, and as said in previous sessions, of course, the costs of electrolyzers are expected to come down massively over the next decade, similar to what happened with solar panels. And this is, this is really a revolution. I cannot find other terms, because we are below 1 euro cent per kilowatt hour, 0.85, which is 1.04 dollar cents per kilowatt hour, was the latest project in Saudi, in Faisalia, 600 megawatt. This is the first in euro terms sub 1 cent project. And I remember the talks, the predictions, all predictions, and we've seen different graphs and expectations were massively proven wrong. Even the biggest optimist just a few years ago would have probably not expected in 2050 that we are sub 1 cent, and it's in 21 that we are sub 1 cent. So this is really the big revolution. Well, this already led to many projects. We have a database in DI, and we see, let's say, a massive acceleration. We are in the scale-up phase already, which will be accelerated with green molecules. Now, this is the North Africa Europe Hydrogen Manifesto. Frank with Art and with dear colleagues from a reason co-authored this. And let's say 2 years ago, when it was published, this kind of run on hydrogen has started, and then we set up the MENA Hydrogen Alliance. Jorgo mentioned about the 2 × 40 gigawatt initiative. That has been a great honor to be able to contribute there. Professor Art van Wijk, my colleague, and Frank, they were supporting a lot. And we've done other reports. The latest one actually was just launched very recently, and it will officially come fully out in a few days from now. And this was jointly with Roland Berger on the local value creation potential. So we looked at the job aspect, which we've done in 2013 already for solar and wind. And this is kind of reload. And this is really the big story for the region. You can debate whether hydrogen can be the new oil, but of course, this is a massive story which is here to stay, and it has huge, even geopolitical implications, but it has great opportunities. So whoever is embracing this development will see the opportunities. And just 2 or 3 slides quickly out of the report, and then I come to the projects. So the GCC region here, and this is on Saudi, UAE, and Oman, this report on these 3 countries, obviously has amazing existing infrastructures, an amazing workforce, but of course threats in ever less jobs in oil and gas, because even the IEA said it now, we don't even need new oil and gas projects from next year. So it's clear that oil and gas is already in decline, which will accelerate now with the energy transition. So this is the big opportunity. We've talked already before about markets, but obviously the region here is in the center of let's say markets between off-takers like Asia, Japan, Europe, and I think Jorgo portrayed and really explained on why Europe will be a very important purchaser, and countries like Germany will be, with even today existing initiatives like H2 Global, which has the strategy on sourcing green molecules via contracts for difference in place. And here, this is an important thing in Europe, hydrogen valleys, so combining generation, demand, applications, mobility, these kind of things, which effectively is called a hydrogen valley, is a very important enabler to create hydrogen economies. And well, you can all read it in the report. It will be available in a few days on the DRI homepage. Now, as Frank said, and also thanks to his initiative, we set up the MENA Hydrogen Alliance last year. You can see on the right-hand side, Frank and myself was the CEO of Mazda when he hosted our first event at WEFES last year. And since then, we were really able to do many things, and particularly set up this new forum, this new platform to discuss, exchange views, to educate government stakeholders, particularly on technical and economic implications of business cases. Our CTO set up a quite comprehensive levelized cost of hydrogen.
You've done 8 minutes.
Thank you very much. So apart from all the possibilities to help the market, then a few words on things initiatives. So this is about transport and storage. So there is a number of pipelines available today, to be precise, 3 between Algeria, Morocco, Spain, to Spain directly to Tunisia and Italy. There could be potentially a pipeline, you can call it South Stream, South Mediterranean, whatever. If we take Nord Stream, that would be an equivalent of 66 gigawatt, which is obviously many times any cable for green molecules could bring. Now, very briefly, last week they inaugurated the first green hydrogen project in Dubai, megawatt scale, wonderful. You can check it out on the internet. There's nice videos about it. This is actually an old slide a few years ago. That was Frank's initiative on, talking about potential hydrogen valleys here. So Dubai is leading the pack. Abu Dhabi has announced an e-fuel project, 20 megawatts, Mazda Siemens this year. That's the boldest one. It was mentioned before. That's huge. That's a $5 billion project approximately, 2 gigawatt electrolysis initiative. This is in Saudi, and it's actually quite close. It's just opposite Sinai, opposite Egypt. So theoretically, and the Saudi energy minister said we could have a pipeline, you know, to bring in the future green molecules from Saudi to Europe. Jordan is just starting, but Jordan has huge potential and is a leader in renewables. Oman has a big project in Duqm by DEME, of which the first phase is 250 to 500 megawatt. Again, similar to NEOM, a joint, a combined capacity factor of solar and wind, close to 70%. So this is a very concrete and advanced project, and there were big announcements about multi gigawatt recently in Oman. Egypt, there's something as well, but last but not least, Morocco. So Morocco has been an early mover, established a national hydrogen commissions already 3 years ago, and we've been working in partnership like we've been doing over the last 12 years on green electrons, also on green molecules. And it's great to see that the first project is actually financed and supported by the German government. So this is just briefly the development here. So it's a massive shift. You know, 2 years ago, nobody took hydrogen serious. 1 year ago, nobody would have expected, you know, that on the same day of the European hydrogen strategy, NEOM would have announced such a project. This year saw an acceleration of projects. So we are living in a completely new world. It could be not more fascinating. And, you know, I'm 100% sure that looking back this decade, we will see, well, this has been breathtaking and all predictions will be proven wrong in a positive way, you know, on this decade for the energy transition, which is currently massively boosted by green molecules. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yes, thank you, Cornelius, for this great overview, especially from the viewpoint of MENA. And it's my real pleasure to invite Martijn. You know, we saved you for the last because we know otherwise people would have left early, but I see there's still a very good crowd waiting for your presentation on, you know, Rotterdam. You know, ports are massively important in this whole new hydrogen economy. And I guess it's fair to say that Rotterdam is leading. That is up to you to convince Martijn. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Frank. It's always a pleasure to see you and good to hear from you. Really nice presentations just before from Marcello and Cornelius. And yes, as you mentioned, Frank, I hope to add to that the demand side of the market. It's clearly the potential in the Middle East is phenomenal. I start off here with a beautiful picture of the access channel of the Port of Rotterdam, where you see a beautiful sunset, although unfortunately our sun is not intense enough to produce sufficient sun. And you see the last windmills that we've built on shore, because that's another challenge that we have, is we don't have enough space in the Netherlands. We're quite a full country, actually. And we are building offshore wind farms in the North Sea, but the space in the North Sea is also limited. And as you'll see in a minute, this is one of the reasons that we anticipate a very large amount of our future hydrogen demand to actually be coming from overseas, and particularly from areas in the Middle East. So one of the things here is that a lot of people are talking about a new supply chain. Rotterdam being an energy hub of Northwest Europe, very much a bunker fuel hub as well, responsible for 13% of the total EU energy consumption. We also already have an existing hydrogen industry. We're actually producing 450,000 tons of hydrogen. And that's being consumed mostly by refineries and hydrocracking. And we have 2 privately operated networks actually connecting Rotterdam to Belgium and northern France. So one of the main advantages in Rotterdam really is that we're not starting from scratch. We already have an industry that's very easy to expand. And we're not only talking, of course, about the Netherlands. Clearly, the Netherlands and Germany, one of the leaders in the energy transition in Europe. We are our national gas transport company is looking at converting part of our national gas grid into a hydrogen grid. So we're going to have a double pipeline around the country distributing hydrogen within probably 4 to 5 years from now. So really moving forward very fastly, and also connecting to the German potential future hydrogen grid, which they are also developing, and particularly the connection Rotterdam to the German industry of North Rhine-Westphalia is one that's very strong already, and that of course will be expanded with hydrogen connections in the future. So what are we doing in Rotterdam? Well, this infographic gives an overview of the various projects that we're doing. It starts off with the big white pipe through the port, which is a new open access hydrogen backbone called High Transport. We aim to take FID for that by the end of this year and should be operational by 2025. That really is the year in which we anticipate a huge takeoff of a lot of hydrogen projects. So how is hydrogen then fed into that system? Well, we have 3 different sources. First of all, as mentioned, we're going to produce locally produced green hydrogen from the offshore windmills, as I mentioned before. We have already the first Shell and BP electrolyzer plants of 250 megawatts each planned at the western end of the port. But we see a limitation in the longer run of the amount of green power that we can produce, and hence the green hydrogen as well. And secondly, we have our existing gray hydrogen facilities are going to be converted to blue by a project called Porthos, which is our CO2 capture and storage project. And you see the gray pipeline here, which will extend throughout the entire port, take CO2 from refineries and other CO2 emitters, and then store it in an offshore depleted gas field. That also is being planned for 2025 to be operational. And then the third inflow into our system is from import. And as you'll see in a minute, that's actually going to be up to 80 to 90% of the total inflow into our system. And then on the usage side, we're also initiating projects. So we've initiated a project called High Trucks with about 1,000 trucks between Rotterdam and Germany and Antwerp, including fuel stations. And that also aims to get going 2024, 2025. We have a project called RH2 Rhine, which is kicking off this year with the first electrified barges on the River Rhine up to Germany and Switzerland. And we aim within maybe 2 years or 3 years also to add a hydrogen functionality and allowing for a longer reach of the vessels, and hence hydrogen-fired barges to take the cargoes up and down the Rhine River. Then we're also looking at or anticipating our existing industries to use more and more hydrogen, but we're also seeing an influx of new industries. We just had an announcement of a $1.5 billion investment in a new biorefinery, which is going to require green hydrogen to produce its products. So hence a huge amount of potential users. And then last but not least, of course, industrial heating probably will take off in the next decade, and ultimately urban heating as well as greenhouse heating in the north of the port will also be taking off. And then, of course, the backbone will be connected, as mentioned, to the national grid. And we aim to develop a new dedicated green pipeline corridor to Germany. And so in this graph here, you see effectively what I've been saying, but then in numbers, so you see here the year 2020, 500,000 tons of gray hydrogen being converted to green with Porthos project coming online. But the first imports actually from a project from the Middle East, very close to Qatar, anticipated already in 2025. And then, as you see, after 2030, a huge increase in the demand, where there will be a decline of blue hydrogen due to political agreements that have been made in the Dutch political arena, and a limitation of green hydrogen production. And hence that huge yellow triangle, that is hydrogen effectively that we need to come from countries like the Middle East, where you potentially have a surplus hydrogen and energy that we could use here in the Netherlands, but also, of course, in Germany and Belgium. And here to the right, you see the new dedicated pipeline to North Rhine-Westphalia intended. So it's with that ambition, those plans and that ambition, that we believe that we, through our very efficient terminals and efficient logistics and onward connections, we could become the hydrogen hub of Europe, as we are currently the fossil energy hub of Europe. We very strongly believe that we will become the hydrogen hub of Europe, and we welcome and we anticipate hydrogen from all over the world to be distributed to locations all over Europe. And then maybe coming to a close, my job actually was to anticipate where then the hydrogen would be coming from. We did a desktop study, one that DII also probably did in many other parties, and our conclusions are that yeah, there are definitely at least 15 very, very high potential locations that the hydrogen can come from. Clearly the Middle East, also extremely viable. And there will be roughly around 3 demand centers that will compete with each other. But I think at the moment, the European ambition is probably one of the strongest. And so what are we keen to do? Clearly, we're developing all the logistics to provide the demand at our end. The port is already converting, the terminals are converting, the pipelines being laid. But we're also keen to understand more details of the projects where the hydrogen could come from, the export projects, your projects maybe in Qatar or other countries in the Middle East. And we like to work with you, we like to assist you. We're very free in sharing knowledge and making connections and seeing if we can accelerate these new supply chains and maybe help you with your port industrial complex developments on the outside. And in that way, in that manner, and here's a nice example. We are already, for instance, a 50% shareholder in the port of Sohar in Oman, and who are very ambitiously currently converting their industry into more green and electrified industries. And we're helping them with that. And it's in that similar way we could help other ports in the regions as well. And so that's the way that we believe that we would like to work together in a partnership on something that's new business, but most importantly, is important to keep the world a good place to live in for our children in the future.
Yes, thank you very much for that presentation, Martijn. And let me stay with you, because in view of the time, I think we would like to limit it to perhaps one question each. But Martijn, you know, your plans are quite ambitious, and you know, obviously, you being a Dutch port, there's a lot of Dutch connection, if you will. How much government involvement do you need for these things to materialize, and what is the interaction between the public and the private sector?
Yeah, that's a good question, Frank. Clearly, these are such large projects that they cannot be done by private sector or public sector alone. So there's a huge interface there on various facets: subsidies, certification, logistical connections, et cetera, et cetera. So we're actually in continuous talks with the various ministries in the Netherlands, but also with the various ministries in Germany, and particularly the state of North Rhine-Westphalia. Clearly, a large pipeline to Germany is not something that the Port of Rotterdam could finance themselves immediately. So that's, for instance, a scheme where probably subsidies will need to be involved. On the terminal sides, though, we're seeing very ambitious activities from the various terminal operators we have in the port. Everybody's super keen to get involved and to get ready for this new energy transition. And also, so on that side, on the private sector side, also we're seeing a lot of willingness and potential funds getting ready to make this all happen.
Thank you. And I would like to ask Dr. Marcelo and Cornelius to join us for the wrap-up. Dr. Marcelo, there's a bit of debate going on, and you alluded to you know, electric vehicles, biofuels, and now hydrogen. You know, but there seems to be a lot of debate ongoing about, you know, battery electric mobility versus fuel cell mobility. Can you touch upon that briefly? What's your take on that?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a long-lasting debate. There's always been this sense of it's one technology or the other. From a technical perspective, there really is no reason why one should exclude the other. If you look at all these technologies at scale, they are both competitive and they can work very well together. In some cases, there are parts of the market that are best served by one and others that are best served by the others. But they can also be combined in electrified vehicle platform where you have batteries and fuel cells. There are different technologies. One, batteries provides higher power density. The fuel cells provide higher energy density. Now, the problem is that the battery EV industry has scaled up, is scaling up. The hydrogen fuel cell vehicles industry, not yet. But with this new, if you like, wave of interest in hydrogen, where perhaps trucks can be the first mass market for fuel cells in road transport, that picture can change. And there is a clear sense that the car manufacturers that were for many years sticking with fuel cells and being increasingly frustrated about the fact that we're not being really taken very seriously now are really planning to scale up, what with trucks, what with passenger cars as well. So I think ultimately, eventually, we will see the two technologies work together rather than being seen as antagonistic.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I mean, even now we have many different fuels, and there seems to be a largely theoretical debate, but yeah, absolutely, I think there is room for all of that. Cornelius, with the MENA hydrogen lines and DAI Desert Energy, you cover a large area. In terms of hydrogen activity, which countries are at the forefront of activity in MENA?
That's a very good question, Frank. Well, 2 years ago, basically, as I mentioned, nobody would have taken hydrogen serious. I think the UAE and particularly Dubai should get credit for starting the first, well, you can call it pilot demonstration project, but it's a megawatt scale project in Al Qutra at the Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Solar Park, which is now approximately 1 gigawatt of PV, but it's expanded in phases, even with some CSP to 5 gigawatt. So this has been inaugurated last week. So I think in this sense, UAE should get credit. There have been talks about fuel cell mobility, about even safety standards here, standards for fuel cells. There is Abu Dhabi project I mentioned very recently. It's an e-fuel project with 2 airlines as an off-taker, which is also interesting. So I think in this respect, the UAE is very active. The limit is the lack of very good wind resources. Secondly, for sure, Saudi Arabia, and in particular NEOM, because NEOM is almost a country in a country, you know, even with its own legislation. And I think NEOM gets a big credit because this is, you know, almost an unbelievable project, but it's on the way now, you know, to financial close. 2 gigawatt of electrolysis capacity, 1.5 gigawatt of wind, 2.5 gigawatt of solar. So that's really amazing. And Saudi, particularly this year, and with you mentioned, you know, the energy minister, the agreement with Germany and others, I think massively stepped up the race. Then Oman has been very, very active. I mentioned about the project, and Martin mentioned Sohar as well. So that's an additional project to the Duqm project. There's another one with a German company. So Oman is very active. And then, for sure, Egypt has been a bit waking up. So you see big talks, big studies going on in the background, not big announcements as of yet, but I would see Egypt becoming an important green molecule hub. And then, of course, Morocco is on its way. Things could go a little bit faster, but Morocco obviously is a pioneer in renewable energy. And then others for sure in Maghreb and North Africa will follow.
Oh, thank you for that, Cornelius. And with that, I would like to thank you, the last panel, certainly not the least. And you know, I would like to just spend a couple of minutes on a wrap up of the entire day. So we started with His Excellency Christian Tudor, who called hydrogen a revolution. And I think, you know, given the scope and the investments and the activities, I think that's not the wrong word to use. He also pointed to the import and export relationships that we need to work on. And he stressed the need for collaboration in terms of trade, in terms of enabling trade, to come up with a system of sort of certificates and standards that we all agree on and that are workable and that, you know, basically point to the quality of the product that we're going to trade. After that, we had Dr. Altaya, who stressed the climate change aspect of cleaning up fuels. It's, of course, the underlying reason for all of this. We need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And this is not just a burden, it's also an opportunity. It's an economic opportunity and something that we've seen in many of the presentations. We then pivoted to Qatar, and we saw the opportunity that obviously LNG poses towards hydrogen. We've seen tremendous work being done on technology development, the R&D aspect of things. I mean, the reality is that we're at the beginning of the electrolyzer revolution, if you will. So a lot of work can still feed into making the electrolyzers better, making better catalysts to increase the efficiency of processes, etc. And it's good to see that that is also happening in this region. Although I must say that I saw a lot of cooperation with the United States. Coming from Europe, I think there is also European players that would love to work very closely together with Qatari institutions. But again, technology development absolutely crucial and ongoing. And then last but certainly not least, the element of policy. We need policy. We've seen last year many strategies coming out with ambition, with targets, etc., but very flimsy policy detail. We need the policy detail. We know there's a cost gap right now to overcome. There's a lot of work to be done in the regulatory framework around this revolution. And I think this year, next year will be the time to tackle those, because otherwise people will, still look at investments instead of making investments. And with that, I would also like to thank, of course, our friend from QNRF and other Qatari stakeholders, our team for helping co-organize, the ambassador, Your Excellency. Thank you very much, and of course also the listeners. It has been a long session, but it was full of content, and I hope you have learned as much as I have. And with that, I would like to wrap up and thank you again. Everything will be made available on the website. You'll be notified via email when that will be, the recordings as well as the presentations. So don't worry. And of course, feel free to reach out to any of the panelists for in-depth questions. We've seen a lot of very detailed questions in the chat box, and I am not sure we've been able to answer all of them. So feel free to reach out, and we're more than happy to engage and find somebody. If you don't have their email address, send us an email. We will make sure that gets answered. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Well,